I stood in the pouring rain staring at the locked mahogany door of the mansion I had built with my own two bare hands. Through the thick glass I could see my son clinking champagne glasses with his wife, the woman who had just shoved me out into the cold. She told me I was an embarrassment, a dirty old man ruining her perfect high society gala. What she did not know was that the deed to that house, the ground it stood on, and the very money paying for her expensive champagne all belonged to me. I walked away into the dark, but I was not defeated. I was calculating the exact moment I would take it all back. My name is Desmond Wright. I am 71 years old, and for my entire life I believed that blood meant absolute loyalty. I sacrificed everything to pull my son out of the struggles I faced growing up as a black man in Atlanta. I worked until my hands bled so he would never have to know what poverty tasted like. But sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the ones holding the knife to your back. Before I tell you how I dismantled my entitled daughter-in-law's fake empire brick by brick, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited, and that no one should ever disrespect the hands that fed them. It was a Saturday night in late November, and my house was practically vibrating with the sound of a live string quartet and the arrogant chatter of Atlanta's elite. I say my house, but technically I had let my son Trey and his wife Chloe live there to help them establish their image. For decades I had worked in construction and real estate. I poured the concrete foundation of that mansion myself. I laid the imported hardwood floors. I framed the massive windows that were now glowing with warm, expensive light. But to the people inside that house tonight, I was just a ghost haunting the hallways. I was living in a small guest suite on the ground floor, deliberately keeping out of the way. When I retired, I stepped back from the public eye. I wanted to live a quiet and simple life. I wore my old work clothes, drove my rusty Ford truck, and let my son take the spotlight. But Chloe, my daughter-in-law, took my humility for weakness. She was a white woman from a supposedly wealthy family, and she treated me less like a father-in-law and more like a stray dog that had wandered into her pristine living room. She hated my old clothes. She hated the calluses on my hands. She hated everything about me that reminded her that her husband's wealth came from a working-class black man. That night, she was hosting a massive charity gala for her country club friends. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. I had spent the entire evening in my room wearing a faded flannel shirt and the worn-out denim pants I used to wear to my job sites. I was perfectly fine staying away from her pretentious guests. But around 9 o'clock, I felt a terrible thirst. My blood pressure medication always left my mouth dry, and the water pitcher in my room was completely empty. I figured I could just slip into the kitchen through the back servant hallway, grab a simple glass of tap water, and disappear before anyone even noticed I was there. I was wrong. The kitchen was bustling with private caterers in crisp white uniforms, but they were too busy arranging expensive caviar to pay attention to an old man holding a plastic cup. I filled my cup from the refrigerator and turned to leave. That was when the heavy oak door swung open and Chloe marched in. She was flushed with excitement, wearing a designer silk gown that probably cost more than an average person's yearly salary. She stopped dead in her tracks the moment she saw me. Her bright smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of absolute raw disgust. "What are you doing in here?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of the busy kitchen. The caterers immediately stopped what they were doing, looking down at the floor, pretending not to hear. I held up my plastic cup calmly. "Just getting some water, Chloe. I'm heading right back to my room right now." She closed the space between us, her eyes narrowing with a venom I had felt many times before, but never quite this openly. "Are you out of your mind?" she whispered harshly. "Look at you. You look like a homeless person who wandered in off the street. My parents are out there in the main hall. The mayor's wife is out there. If anyone sees you looking like this, I will be a complete laughingstock in this city." I took a slow breath, trying to keep the peace for the sake of my son. "No one saw me, Chloe. I used the back hall. I am not bothering your guests." She did not care about logic. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin through my flannel shirt. "Get out of here right now. I did not invite you to this party, and I will not have you wandering around my kitchen looking like a beggar." I pulled my arm back gently, but firmly maintaining my dignity. "This is my kitchen," I reminded her softly. "I built these cabinets. I bought those appliances." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Your kitchen? Please. Trey pays the property taxes now. This is our house. You are just a guest here, and right now you are a very unwanted one." Before I could say another word, the kitchen door opened again. It was Trey, my son, the boy I had worked 80-hour weeks to send to the best private schools and universities. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, looking every bit the successful tech CEO he desperately wanted everyone to believe he was. Trey, Chloe snapped, immediately turning to him. "Look at your father. He is trying to ruin my night on purpose. He is wandering around where the guests can see him looking like a vagrant. Tell him to leave." I looked at Trey. I waited for him to stand up for me. I waited for the boy I raised to tell his wife to show some basic respect to the man who gave them the roof over their heads. I waited for the son who used to sit on my shoulders at construction sites to defend his father. But Trey looked down at the polished floor. He could not even meet my eyes. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking nervous and deeply embarrassed. "Dad," he murmured softly, "could you just maybe go back to your room and stay there?" Chloe crossed her arms aggressively. "No," she said sharply. "I do not even want him inside the house tonight. Every time he comes out of that room, he smells like old wood and cheap soap. Tell him to go out to the garage until the party is completely over." I stared at my son in sheer disbelief. The silence in the kitchen was heavy and suffocating. The caterers were frozen, and I could feel their pity. Pity is a very heavy burden for a proud man to carry. Trey finally looked up, his eyes completely hollow and full of cowardice. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It is raining out, but the garage is heated. There is a folding cot in there by the storage boxes. Just go out there for a few hours, okay? Chloe is really stressed about this gala. Please just do it for me. Do not make a scene." A freezing cold November rain was beating against the glass of the back door. My own flesh and blood wanted me, a 71-year-old man, to go sleep on a stiff cot in a garage next to lawnmowers and spare tires, just so I would not embarrass them in front of their wealthy white friends. I did not yell, I did not scream, I did not throw my water cup. When you have spent a lifetime building skyscrapers and neighborhoods from the ground up, you learn that losing your temper never fixes a structural flaw. You cannot negotiate with a rotten foundation. You have to tear the rotten wood out completely and start over. I looked at Chloe's smug, triumphant face. She thought she had established her dominance. Then I looked at Trey's weak, pathetic posture. I did not say a single word to either of them. I simply nodded my head, once turned around and walked toward the back door. Chloe stepped forward and opened it for me, letting the freezing wind and rain whip into the warm kitchen. "Do not come back inside until I text Trey that the coast is clear," she demanded loudly. I stepped out onto the wet concrete patio. The heavy mahogany door slammed shut right behind me, and I heard the loud metallic click of the deadbolt locking me out. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally put the pathetic old man in his place. But as I stood there in the freezing rain, the profound sadness in my chest completely evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity so cold and so sharp it felt like a diamond cutting through glass. I did not walk toward the garage. I reached into the deep pocket of my worn-out jeans and pulled out my car keys. I walked past the garage and headed straight toward the side gate where my old truck was parked. They thought they owned my house. They thought they owned me. They thought I was just an old fool with no power and no voice. It was time to show them that the architect who built their perfect little world could demolish it in the blink of an eye. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and drove out into the stormy night. I was not going to a shelter. I was going to reclaim my throne. The rain hammered against the windshield of my old Ford truck as I drove away from the mansion. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth, a rhythmic soundtrack to the absolute clarity settling over my mind. My son and his wife thought I was driving into the dark to find a cheap motel or maybe sleep in the cabin of this very truck. They thought they had broken a poor, defenseless old man, but they were fools. You see, when you spend 50 years studying structural integrity, you learn to spot a hollow facade from a mile away. Chloe and Trey were nothing but cheap drywall painted to look like marble. And I was the wrecking ball. I did not drive to a shelter. I merged onto the highway and headed straight for downtown Atlanta. The city skyline glowed against the stormy night clouds. I looked up at those towering glass and steel structures. I knew them intimately. I knew the weight of their steel beams and the depth of their concrete roots because my company had built half of them. I pulled my rusty truck into the pristine, brightly lit driveway of the Ritz-Carlton. The contrast was almost comical. My truck idled loudly next to a row of sleek black luxury sedans and imported sports cars. Instantly, a young valet in a crisp uniform rushed over. He waved his hands frantically, his face twisted in a mixture of panic and disdain. "Sir, you cannot park that thing here," the young man said loudly, tapping on my wet window. "This is the main entrance for hotel guests only. The delivery loading dock is around the back in the alley." I rolled down the window, the cold rain blowing onto my face. "I am not here to make a delivery, son," I said calmly. "I am checking in." The young man let out a condescending sigh. He looked at my soaked flannel shirt, my faded jeans, and my scuffed work boots. "Look, old man," he said with a completely disrespectful tone. "I do not have time for games. You need to move this piece of junk right now before I call security and have you dragged off the property." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy, solid black metal card. I held it out the window. "Give this to your general manager," I said. "Tell him Desmond is in the driveway." The valet rolled his eyes but took the card. He stomped over to the glass doors where the night manager was already rushing out. I watched through the rain as the manager snatched the card from the young man's hand. The manager's face went completely pale. He shoved the valet aside and practically sprinted through the puddles toward my truck, not even caring that his expensive suit was getting ruined by the storm. "Mr. Wright," the manager gasped, bowing his head slightly as he reached my window. "I am so incredibly sorry for the confusion. This young man is new, and he clearly did not recognize you. Please forgive us. Your private penthouse is fully prepared and waiting for you." I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. "Have someone park the truck," I told him, "and make sure the boy learns some manners before he ends up working at a gas station." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir," the manager stuttered, gesturing for me to follow him. The valet stood frozen in absolute shock, his jaw practically touching the wet pavement, as the manager led me through the grand lobby. We bypassed the regular check-in desk completely. We walked straight to a private elevator reserved only for the highest tier of VIP guests. When the golden doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a sprawling penthouse suite that overlooked the entire glittering city of Atlanta. The room was pure luxury. Thick carpets, imported leather furniture, and a massive marble fireplace. I walked into the master bathroom, stripped off my wet, pathetic disguise, and took a long, hot shower. The hot water washed away the smell of the cold rain, but it could not wash away the sting of my son's betrayal. When I walked out of the bathroom wearing a thick white robe, I went straight to the heavy mahogany desk in the corner of the room. I opened a hidden compartment in my bag and pulled out my encrypted smartphone. It was not the cheap burner phone I let Trey and Chloe see me use. This was the secure device I used to communicate with my board of directors. I turned it on and the screen lit up with dozens of notifications, market updates, investment portfolios, and emails from international banks. I am not a retired construction worker surviving on a tiny pension. I am the founder and chairman of Wright Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar private equity and real estate investment firm. I control commercial properties, residential developments, and tech investments across the entire East Coast. I chose to live simply in that guest room because I wanted Trey to feel like the man of the house. I wanted him to build his own legacy. I paid for his education. I quietly funded his arrogant lifestyle, and I stepped into the shadows so he could shine. I wanted to see if wealth would corrupt him or if the values I taught him would keep him grounded. Tonight I got my answer. The boy I raised was dead, replaced by a greedy coward who let his racist wife throw his own father into the freezing rain. I poured myself a glass of aged bourbon from the minibar and sat by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city lights flicker. They thought they had kicked a beggar out into the street. They did not realize they had just unleashed a predator. I spent the entire night awake formulating a master plan to completely dismantle their pathetic illusion of power. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a bright golden light over Atlanta. I was sitting at the dining table, eating a quiet breakfast of black coffee and scrambled eggs, when my old cheap cell phone began to buzz. I looked at the cracked screen. The caller ID said Trey. I let it ring 5 times before I finally pressed answer. I did not say a word. I just breathed into the receiver. Dad Trey's voice came through the speaker. He sounded nervous, hesitant, like a child who knew he was in deep trouble. "Dad, are you there? Look about last night. I am really sorry." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Are you Trey?" I asked softly. "Are you really sorry?" "Yes, of course I am." He stammered quickly. Things just got out of hand. Chloe was under a lot of pressure with the gala. The catering was delayed, the guests were demanding, and she just snapped. You know how she gets. But you did not have to run off like that. Where did you even go? Did you sleep in your truck? I listened to his weak, pathetic excuses. He was not calling to check on my well-being. I could hear the calculation in his voice. He was fishing for information. I am fine, I said, keeping my voice sounding tired and old. I found a place to rest. Good, Trey said, sounding relieved. Listen, Dad, Chloe and I were talking this morning. We are actually really worried about you. You have been acting a little strange lately, wandering into the kitchen during a major event, leaving the house in the middle of a storm without telling anyone. Chloe thinks you might be getting a little confused. I froze. My grip on the coffee mug tightened until my knuckles turned white. Confused, I repeated slowly. Yeah. Trey continued, his voice taking on a fake tone of deep sympathy. We think your memory might be slipping, Dad. It happens at your age. There is nothing to be ashamed of, but we need to make sure you are safe. So I had my lawyer draft up some medical power of attorney papers. It is just a precaution. You sign them and it gives me the legal right to make health and financial decisions for you if you get too confused to do it yourself. We just want to take care of you, Dad. The absolute sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow to the chest. This was not an apology. This was a trap. They did not just want to humiliate me. They did not just want me to hide in the garage like a dog. They wanted to legally declare me mentally incompetent. They wanted to strip me of my civil rights, take total control of my assets, and lock me away in some facility so they could have my mansion all to themselves. My own son was trying to legally erase me from existence. I felt a dark, terrifying rage rise up in my throat, but I forced it down. If they wanted to play a game of deception, I would show them how a true mastermind plays. I sounded perfectly helpless when I replied, "Power of attorney, Trey. Do you really think I need that?" "It is for the best, Dad," he urged, sensing my fake hesitation. "Just come back to the house this afternoon. We have the papers ready. You sign them and we can put all this ugliness behind us. You can stay in your room and we will make sure you are totally taken care of." "All right, son," I whispered, letting my voice crack just a little bit for dramatic effect. "I will be there." I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the marble table. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the massive mirror on the wall. The tired old man in the flannel shirt was gone. I was Desmond Wright, and it was time to go to war. They wanted to take my mind and my home. Now, I was going to take absolutely everything from them. I did not return to the mansion that afternoon to play the part of the obedient, confused old man. I drove my beat-up truck just close enough to park down the street and walked up to the front porch. Trey and Chloe were waiting for me in the living room. They had a young notary public sitting nervously on the edge of the sofa, his stamp ready on the coffee table. Trey had the documents laid out: medical power of attorney and transfer of asset management. He looked at me with that same fake sympathetic smile. "Come on in, Dad," he said smoothly. "Let us just get this paperwork out of the way so you can rest." I looked at the thick stack of papers. Then I looked Trey dead in the eye, dropping the fragile old man act for just one split second. My voice was steady and deep. "I am not signing away my life today, son." The air in the room instantly froze. Trey took a step back, shocked by the sudden authority in my tone, but Chloe erupted. The polite, concerned daughter-in-law mask fell completely off, revealing the ugly reality underneath. "You crazy old fool," she screamed, her face turning red. "We are trying to keep you from wandering into traffic and you want to be stubborn. If you do not sign these papers right now, you cannot step foot in my house ever again." "Your house?" I asked quietly. "Yes, my house," she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at the door. "Get out. Go sleep under a bridge for all I care. You are not my problem anymore." Trey stood there completely silent, watching his wife kick his elderly father out onto the street. He did not say a single word to stop her. I did not argue. I simply turned around and walked out the front door. As I stepped off the porch, the heavy door slammed shut behind me. A few seconds later, I heard the electronic keypad beep rapidly. Chloe was changing the security codes. She was changing the locks on the very doors I had carved and hung with my own hands. She thought she had locked me out of my own property. She thought she was so smart. What my arrogant daughter-in-law did not know was that I wrote the source code for that entire security system. I walked back to my truck and drove straight to my penthouse at the Ritz-Carlton. I poured myself a black coffee, sat down at the heavy mahogany desk, and opened my encrypted laptop. When I built that mansion, I installed state-of-the-art hidden surveillance in every common area, every hallway, and every major room. I did not do it because I was paranoid. I did it because I knew the value of the art and the assets I had hidden behind those walls before I decided to play the role of a poor retired worker. Every smart home system, every digital lock, every camera was connected to a private server that only I had the master access to. I typed in my sequence and the screen flickered to life. High-definition video and crystal-clear audio filled my laptop screen. I was sitting miles away in absolute luxury, but I was inside my house. I watched the living room feed. Chloe was pacing back and forth, furiously tapping on her phone. Trey was pouring himself a massive glass of scotch, looking stressed and pathetic. "They are here," Chloe announced suddenly, her mood completely flipping to pure excitement. A few minutes later, the front door opened. Enter Richard and Susan, Chloe's parents. They were the very picture of arrogant, old, money, Southern entitlement. Richard was a tall man who always wore pastel polo shirts and acted like he owned whatever room he walked into. Susan carried herself with a rigid snobbery, her nose permanently turned up as if something always smelled bad. They walked into my house looking like they had just conquered a new territory. "Oh, Chloe, darling." Susan sighed, looking around the grand foyer. "The drive over here was just exhausting. I still cannot believe you live in this specific neighborhood. The demographics around here are just so questionable." Richard crossed his arms, inspecting the crown molding. "It is a surprisingly beautiful structure, though I will admit. It is truly shocking that a common laborer could afford these kinds of building materials. He must have stolen them from his job sites over the years." I sat in my penthouse, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. They were standing in a home funded by my sweat and my blood, calling me a thief. "Well, you do not have to worry about him anymore," Chloe laughed, pouring her parents some of my expensive wine. I kicked him out. He refused to sign the medical papers, so I threw him out on the street. He is probably begging for change downtown by now. Trey shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Chloe, maybe we should not have been so harsh. He is an old man. What if something happens to him out there?" "Oh, grow up, Trey," Chloe snapped. "He is a burden. Besides, with him out of the way, my parents do not have to stay in the cramped guest wing anymore." "Mom, Dad, I want you to take the master suite on the top floor. It is massive and it has the best view of the city." My blood ran completely cold. The master suite. That was my room. It was the room I had built specifically for my late wife, Vivian. It was the only room in the house I kept perfectly preserved. Her favorite reading chair was still by the window. Her vanity was exactly how she left it. Trey actually spoke up. "Chloe, wait. My dad's things are still in there. My mother's things are in there. We cannot just let someone else sleep in that room." Chloe glared at him with absolute contempt. "He is not coming back, Trey. Tomorrow I am hiring a crew to box up all that old junk and throw it in the alley for the trash collectors. My parents are taking the master suite tonight." I switched the camera feed to the master suite corridor. I watched through the hidden lens as Susan and Richard walked into my private sanctuary. They did not look like guests. They looked like scavengers looking for scraps. Susan immediately started poking around. She opened the heavy oak wardrobe I had built for Vivian. She pushed aside the beautiful dresses I could not bear to part with. Then she found the hidden drawer at the bottom. My heart completely stopped. She reached in and pulled out a heavy velvet mahogany box. It was Vivian's jewelry box. I spent 10 years buying those pieces for my wife. Custom-cut diamonds, emeralds, and heavy vintage gold. It was my way of making up for the cheap tin ring I gave her when we were young, broke, and struggling to survive in Atlanta. When I finally made my millions, I made sure she wore real stones like the queen she was. Susan popped the latch and opened the box. Her eyes widened with raw, naked greed. She gasped and called her husband over. "Richard, look at this," Susan whispered, pulling out a heavy diamond necklace. "These are real stones. Where on earth did that old construction worker steal these from?" Richard took the necklace, examining it closely in the light. "These belong in a proper collection, Susan. Not hidden in some dark closet. Let us call the auction house downtown tomorrow morning. We can easily get $100,000 for this lot. It will really help cover my business shortfall this quarter." Chloe walked into the bedroom just in time to hear the plan. She saw the jewelry, and instead of stopping them, she smiled. "Take it, Mom. The old man probably bought it at a pawn shop anyway. Sell it all. Think of it as compensation for having to deal with his existence." The coldness inside me vanished. It was instantly replaced by a blazing, uncontrollable fire. Disrespecting me was one thing, Trying to steal my house was another. But touching Vivian's memory, calling me a thief, and planning to sell the physical manifestation of my love for my dead wife to pay for their pathetic, miserable lives, that was a death sentence. I closed the laptop screen. The time for observing was over. I picked up my encrypted smartphone. I dialed a number I only used when absolute financial and legal destruction was the only option left on the table. Nia, I said when the line connected. Nia was my lead counsel. She was a brilliant, ruthless 40-year-old black woman who had graduated at the absolute top of her class at Harvard Law. She was a great white shark in a tailored suit, and she handled all the aggressive acquisitions and legal battles for Wright Holdings. She did not take prisoners. Mr. Wright, her sharp professional voice came through the speaker. It is late. Who are we destroying tonight? My son? I told her, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. And the parasites he married into. I need you here at the penthouse right now. Bring the corporate asset portfolios, bring the eviction protocols, and bring the fraud investigation team. We are going to bleed them dry. Nia walked into my penthouse exactly 22 minutes after I hung up the phone. She did not come alone. Behind her were two men carrying heavy encrypted briefcases, my absolute best forensic accountants. Nia wore a razor-sharp navy blue suit, shaking the rain from her umbrella with a look of lethal focus. She did not offer me empty sympathies or ask how I was feeling. She knew me better than that. When a man like me summons his legal executioner in the middle of the night, he does not want a hug. He wants blood, Mr. Wright, she said, placing her sleek tablet on the marble dining table. The eviction protocols are ready to be filed, and the asset freeze documents just need your thumbprint. But before we drop the hammer, you need to tell me exactly where we are aiming. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering Atlanta skyline. Pointed at Trey. I said, my voice completely devoid of the warmth a father usually reserves for his son. I want you to tear open his company. I want to see every single penny moving in and out of Apex Technologies. Nia paused for a fraction of a second. She knew exactly what Apex Technologies was. 3 years ago, when Trey came to me begging for a chance to prove himself in the tech industry, I did not just write him a check. I wanted him to feel the pride of earning his own success. So I set up an anonymous shell corporation, an angel investment firm, that quietly injected $2.5 million of seed capital into his startup. Trey thought he had pitched his brilliant software idea to a group of mysterious Silicon Valley billionaires. He thought he had earned that money with his own intellect. He had no idea he was playing in a sandbox built and funded entirely by his old man. I gave him that money because I wanted him to have the head start I never had. When I was his age, I was hauling bricks and mixing concrete under the scorching Georgia sun, fighting for every single dollar just to keep the lights on. I wanted my son to wear tailored suits and sit in air-conditioned boardrooms. But now, after watching him stand by while his wife threw me out into the freezing rain, I needed to know exactly what he had built with my sacrifice. Nia nodded to her accountants. They opened their laptops, connecting directly to the banking mainframes my company had backdoor access to. Fingers flew across keyboards. The massive flat-screen television on the penthouse wall flickered to life, displaying endless columns of financial data, wire transfers, and expense reports. "Let us see what your son has been building," Nia murmured, her eyes scanning the data scrolling across the screen. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. As the numbers populated the screen, the grand illusion of Trey Wright, the successful tech CEO, completely shattered before my eyes. "Mr. Wright," one of the accountants said, his voice hesitant, "there is no software development happening here. There is no engineering payroll. There are no server hosting fees. This company is a complete ghost ship." I walked slowly toward the screen, my eyes narrowing. "What do you mean it is a ghost ship? Explain it to me in plain English." Nia stepped forward, her perfectly manicured finger pointing to a massive red column on the digital spreadsheet. She looked at me with a mixture of professional disgust and deep pity. "It means Trey never built an app, Mr. Wright. He never hired a single programmer. The moment your angel investment cleared into the Apex Technologies business account, he started systematically funneling the capital into private offshore accounts and personal lines of credit. He embezzled $2 million of your money to fund a completely fake lifestyle." My chest tightened as if an iron band had been wrapped around my ribs. Show me the expenditures, I ordered, my voice dangerously low. Where did my money go? Nia tapped her tablet, bringing up the itemized bank statements. It went to a brand new matte black Porsche 911 fully customized, paid in cash. It went to VIP tables at high-end nightclubs across Atlanta. But that is just the beginning. Look at these retail transactions. I stared at the screen as the names of luxury boutiques scrolled past. Hermes, Chanel, Cartier, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on designer handbags, diamond bracelets, and exotic vacations to St. Bart's. Chloe's entire closet, her entire fake high society persona, was bought and paid for by the very same black man she had just kicked out of her kitchen for looking like a beggar. She was walking around parading her wealth to her country club friends, completely unaware that she was wearing the concrete, the sweat, and the blood of my lifetime of labor. But then, Nia pulled up a separate ledger, and what I saw next made my blood turn to absolute ice. There were massive recurring wire transfers, leaving Trey's account every single month. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. The recipient name on the routing slips made my hands curl into tight, shaking fists. Richard and Susan Albright, Chloe's parents. Nia looked at me, her eyes flashing with realization. Your son has been keeping his in-laws afloat, she said quietly. Richard Albright's shipping company has been functionally bankrupt for the last 2 years. They were drowning in debt, moments away from losing their country club memberships and their luxury estate. Trey has been secretly bailing them out. He has been paying their mortgages, covering their luxury car leases, and funding their lavish lifestyle to buy their approval. The profound, sickening irony of the situation washed over me like a tidal wave. An hour ago, Richard and Susan were standing in the master bedroom of my house, turning their noses up at my architecture. They were calling me a common thief. They were plotting to sell my dead wife's vintage jewelry just to cover their business shortfalls. They looked down on me because of the color of my skin and the calluses on my hands. Yet they were literally surviving off my bank account. They were parasites feeding off the very man they despised. Trey had stolen from his own father to buy the affection of a racist, arrogant white family that would never truly accept him. He sold his soul and his heritage just to play pretend in their shallow world. Shut it all down, I said, my voice eerily calm. Freeze the remaining funds. Liquidate the shell company. I want his credit cards declining before the sun comes up. Nia nodded, but suddenly her tablet let out a sharp, piercing alarm. It was a critical security alert from the fraud department of First National Bank, the primary institution that handled all my major real estate holdings. Nia's eyes widened in genuine shock as she opened the encrypted file. Mr. Wright, she said, her voice completely losing its usual professional detachment. You need to look at this right now. She swiped her tablet, projecting a scanned PDF document onto the massive screen on the wall. It was a commercial loan application. But it was not just any loan, it was a secondary mortgage application for the mansion. Trey is leveraging the house, Nia explained, typing furiously on her keyboard to trace the origin of the document. He is trying to pull $5 million of cash equity out of the property. I stepped closer to the screen, my eyes locking onto the bottom of the final page. There, sitting perfectly on the dotted line, was my signature. It was a flawless forgery, every loop, every slant perfectly mimicking the way I signed my name. Trey had lived with me long enough to know exactly how to copy it. He knew my habits, he knew my banking contacts, and he was using that knowledge to steal the very roof over my head. He was not just locking me out of the house. He was putting my home on the line to cover the massive hole he had blown through his fake company's finances. If he defaulted on this massive loan, the bank would seize the property and the home I built for Vivian would be lost forever. When is this being processed? I demanded, the sheer gravity of the betrayal settling heavy in my bones. Nia checked the banking timestamp on the application. The funds are in escrow. The final closing signature is scheduled for today, 2 o'clock this afternoon at the First National VIP branch downtown. Trey and Chloe are going in person to finalize the paperwork and collect the cashier's check. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully disposed of the crazy old man in the rain, clearing the path to walk into a bank and steal $5 million of my life's work. They thought I was sitting in a dark, cold garage crying over my broken family. I reached out and gently closed the lid of Nia's laptop. The time for gathering evidence was over. Nia, I said, adjusting the cuffs of my thick white robe. Call the regional director of First National. Tell him to prepare the grand boardroom and brew a fresh pot of his best coffee. And tell him under no circumstances is he to cancel Trey's 2 o'clock appointment. Nia looked up at me, a dangerous, predatory smile slowly forming on her lips. Are we crashing a bank closing, Mr. Wright? I walked over to the closet where the hotel staff had just delivered my freshly pressed, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. No, I replied, my voice echoing with the authority of a man who owned the very ground they walked on. We are not crashing anything. We are just going to give my son and his lovely wife the surprise of their miserable lives. The architect is coming to inspect his property. I sat in the back of my private town car parked just across the street from the First National Bank downtown. My custom Tom Ford suit was hanging neatly in the garment bag next to me. I was not wearing it. Instead, I had put my faded flannel shirt and my scuffed work boots right back on. If you want to catch a rat, you do not stand in the light in a tailored suit. You have to climb down into the dirt and play their game. Nia, my lead attorney, had already set the trap. Now it was my turn to spring it. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the towering glass building. I owned the land this bank was built on, but my son and his wife had absolutely no idea. I walked through the heavy revolving doors and let my shoulders slump. I slowed my pace, making my steps look heavy and unsure. I let my hands tremble just a little bit. I became the pathetic, confused old man they desperately wanted me to be. The main lobby was quiet and pristine, but I ignored the regular tellers. I shuffled my way toward the frosted glass walls of the VIP commercial lending department. Through the glass, I could see them. Trey and Chloe were sitting in plush leather chairs across from Mr. Bennett, the senior branch manager. Chloe was practically bouncing in her seat, wearing a brand new white designer dress. Trey was sweating but trying to maintain the posture of a successful tech boss. Between them on the polished oak desk was the final contract for a $5 million equity loan against my mansion. Mr. Bennett was holding his solid gold pen. He was pretending to review the final page, waiting for my signal. I pushed the heavy glass door open. It creaked loudly and all 3 heads snapped in my direction. The color instantly drained from my son's face. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. Chloe, on the other hand, turned bright red with pure absolute rage. "What is he doing here?" she hissed loudly, her voice dripping with venom. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the marble floor. "Trey, do something. Tell him to leave right now." I kept my head lowered, playing the part perfectly. I let my voice waver, making it sound thin and desperate. "Trey," I called out, taking a slow, trembling step forward. "Son, I have been looking everywhere for you." Chloe marched toward me, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Get out," she ordered, her tone filled with pure disgust. "You are not supposed to be here. This is a private VIP banking suite for high-net-worth clients. You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster. You are going to ruin this for us." She turned her head and yelled toward the lobby. "Security. We need security in here immediately. There is a crazy old vagrant harassing us." Trey jumped up and grabbed his wife's arm, looking terrified. "Chloe, stop it," he whispered frantically. "That is my dad. Do not make a scene in front of the bank manager." He turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Dad, please. You cannot be here right now. We are in the middle of a very sensitive business transaction. Go sit in the lobby. I will buy you a coffee, and we can talk later. Just please go." I did not move. I looked at the desk and saw the thick stack of mortgage documents. My forged signature was right there on the top page. I looked back at Trey, forcing my eyes to widen with fake confusion and fear. "Trey," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "Did you go into my room? Did you take the red folder from the metal box in my closet? I cannot find the deed to the house I built for your mother. Did you take my house papers, Trey?" The silence that followed was absolute. The entire VIP suite stopped breathing. Chloe froze, her hand still raised in the air. Trey looked like he was about to pass out. He swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. "Dad, you are confused," he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "You do not know what you are talking about. Your mind is playing tricks on you again." I turned my gaze to Mr. Bennett, the bank manager. He was a sharp man who had managed my corporate accounts for 15 years. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what was happening. He stood up slowly, placing his gold pen down on the desk. "Excuse me," Mr. Bennett said, his voice cold and strictly professional. "Mr. Wright, did I just hear this gentleman correctly? Is he claiming that the property deed you provided for this $5 million collateral loan was taken without his permission? Chloe quickly stepped forward, pasting a fake, sickeningly sweet smile on her face. Oh, please do not listen to him, Mr. Bennett. She laughed nervously. My father-in-law is very sick. He suffers from severe dementia. He does not even know what day it is most of the time. We are actually finalizing this loan so we can afford to put him in a proper medical facility. He is just confused. Mr. Bennett looked at Chloe, and then he looked directly at me. He gave me a barely noticeable nod. Ma'am, he said firmly, the bank takes allegations of stolen assets very seriously, and according to this document, the primary title holder of the estate is a Mr. Desmond Wright. He looked at Trey. Are you telling me that you signed this document on his behalf without a verified legal power of attorney present? Trey opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was completely trapped. Chloe slammed her hands on the desk. This is ridiculous, she shouted, losing her temper completely. My husband is the owner of that house. That old man is crazy. Just stamp the paper and give us our money. We have investors waiting. We have a lifestyle to maintain. You are a bank manager. Just do your job. Mr. Bennett did not flinch. He picked up the stack of papers and calmly tapped them against the desk to straighten them. Then he picked up a red rubber stamp and pressed it down hard on the front page, but it did not say approved. It said denied. Due to suspected fraud and the direct verbal contestation of the primary property owner, Mr. Bennett announced loudly, I am legally obligated to halt this transaction immediately. Furthermore, bank policy dictates that I must freeze all associated accounts connected to your name. Mr. Wright, pending a full investigation by our federal fraud department. Trey collapsed into his chair, holding his head in his hands. He knew it was over. The fake tech company, the stolen money, the forged signature, it was all going to come crashing down. Chloe, on the other hand, looked like a cornered wild animal, her face contorted with a rage so ugly it completely destroyed any physical beauty she possessed. What do you mean, freeze the accounts? She screamed, her voice echoing through the glass walls. You cannot do that. I have a shopping account linked to that. My credit cards are tied to that. How am I supposed to pay for anything? Mr. Bennett looked at her with pure professional disdain. I suggest you contact a lawyer, ma'am, because as of right now your husband's accounts hold a balance of 0 available funds. Chloe turned around and glared at me. Her eyes were full of absolute hatred. I stood there playing the fragile old man, pulling my jacket tight around my chest as if I were scared of her. She stomped over to Trey and grabbed him by the collar of his expensive jacket, pulling him to his feet. Get up, you useless coward, she hissed into his ear, but I could hear every word perfectly. We are leaving. She dragged him toward the door, stopping right in front of me. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume mixing with the smell of her desperation. You think you won, you crazy old fool, she whispered venomously. You just ruined our lives, but I promise you I am going to ruin yours. You are not going back to that house. You are going straight to a mental asylum. I am going to find a doctor who will lock you in a padded room until the day you die, and then I will sell that stupid house myself. She shoved past me, pulling her broken, defeated husband behind her. They stormed out of the bank, leaving a trail of shattered pride in their wake. Once the glass doors closed, and they were completely out of sight, my trembling stopped. I straightened my back. My shoulders squared, and the fragile old man illusion vanished completely. I walked over to the desk and sat down in the leather chair my son had just vacated. Mr. Bennett let out a long breath and wiped his brow. That was intense, Mr. Wright. We have frozen his personal accounts and flagged the forgery just as you requested. The authorities will be notified if he tries to move any remaining hidden assets. I nodded, pulling my secure phone from my pocket. Thank you, Arthur. You played your part perfectly. I stood up and walked out of the bank, the cold precision of a master architect guiding my every step. Chloe thought she was going to lock me in a mental asylum. She thought she could just buy a fake doctor and throw me away like garbage. She had no idea that I had already recorded her threat. She had no idea that her desperation was exactly what I was counting on. She was about to step directly into the next phase of my trap, and I was going to let her bury herself so deep she would never see the light of day again. I sat in the dim light of my Ritz-Carlton penthouse, the soft glow of my encrypted laptop screen reflecting in my eyes. I was sipping a glass of aged bourbon, watching the live security feed from my mansion. The brutal confrontation at the bank had completely shattered my daughter-in-law's composure. She was pacing the living room like a caged rabid animal, her white designer dress now wrinkled and discarded for a silk robe. Trey was slouched on the sofa, holding a heavy glass of whiskey, staring blankly at the floor. He knew his fake empire was ruined, but Chloe absolutely refused to accept defeat. She was a woman who had never been told no, and she was willing to burn the entire world down just to get her way. Around 8 o'clock that evening, the doorbell rang. Through the hidden camera positioned in the grand foyer, I watched Chloe rush to open it. In walked a man carrying a sleek black leather medical bag. He wore a sharp, expensive suit, but he lacked the exhausted, dedicated posture of a real physician. This was Dr. Gregory Thorne. My legal team had already warned me about him in the past. He was a notorious concierge doctor for Atlanta's corrupt elite, a man known for writing highly questionable prescriptions and signing whatever legal medical documents his wealthy clients needed, provided the price was right. Chloe led him into the formal living room, pulling the heavy oak doors shut behind them. They did not know that the very walls of that house were listening. I turned up the volume on my laptop, catching every single word in perfect, crystal-clear audio. Dr. Thorne did not even bother to sit down. He looked around my home with a greedy, evaluating glint in his eye. "Let us make this quick, Chloe," he said, his voice slick and arrogant. "You said it was an absolute emergency. Where is the patient?" Chloe crossed her arms defensively. "There is no patient to examine, Gregory. The crazy old man ran off. But that is exactly why I need your help right now. We need a certified medical evaluation signed tonight. I need you to state that Desmond Wright is suffering from severe late-stage Alzheimer's. I need the documentation to explicitly state that he is a danger to himself and others, completely incapable of managing his own financial and legal affairs." Dr. Thorne raised an eyebrow, letting out a low, mocking whistle. "You are asking me to falsify a terminal cognitive decline diagnosis for a man I have not even taken a basic blood pressure reading on. Do you realize the kind of legal liability that puts me in? If the state medical board ever found out, my license would be shredded in seconds." Trey finally looked up from his glass, his voice shaking with panic. "Chloe, we cannot do this. This is a federal crime. If the bank is already investigating us for the mortgage, a fake medical record is going to send us straight to prison." "Shut up, Trey," Chloe snapped. Not even bothering to look at her husband, she turned back to the corrupt doctor. "Everyone has a price, Gregory. I know exactly how you operate. Name it." The doctor smiled a cold, calculated smirk. $50,000. Cash. Non-negotiable. And I want it right now before my pen even touches that paper. Trey jumped up from the sofa. 50,000. Chloe, our accounts are totally frozen. We have literally nothing. The bank manager cut us off this afternoon. Chloe completely ignored him. She walked over to the antique grandfather clock in the corner of the room, reached behind the carved wooden paneling, and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She tossed it onto the coffee table. It hit the glass with a heavy, satisfying thud. I leaned closer to my screen, my jaw clenching so tight my teeth ached. I knew exactly what was in that envelope. It was the cash Richard and Susan, her arrogant parents, had gotten from fencing some of my late wife Vivian's vintage jewelry earlier that morning. They had stolen the physical memories of my dead wife, pawned them off like common thieves just to fund a fake medical diagnosis meant to lock me in a padded room. The sheer, unadulterated evil of it was almost hard to comprehend. Dr. Thorne unzipped his bag, pulled out a thick stack of official medical letterhead, and began to write. I watched in flawless 4K resolution as he documented my supposed mental decay. He detailed fake cognitive tests I had supposedly failed. He wrote down aggressive behaviors I had never committed. He signed his name with a dramatic flourish, pressed his official medical seal onto the paper, and handed it directly to Chloe. She snatched the paper, her eyes gleaming with wicked, desperate triumph. "This is it," she whispered, holding the document like a trophy. "Tomorrow morning we take this straight to the judge. We get the emergency conservatorship approved. We take back the house and we force the bank to unfreeze the accounts. The old man is finished." Dr. Thorne grabbed the envelope of cash, stuffed it into his leather bag, and walked out of my house without looking back. I sat back in my leather chair in the penthouse. My daughter-in-law thought she was a master strategist holding the ultimate winning card. She did not realize she had just handed me the exact rope I would use to hang them all. I did not wait for the morning to come. I extracted the high-definition video and the perfectly isolated audio track. I clipped the exact moment the stolen money hit the table and the exact moment the fraudulent signature hit the paper. I opened a secure, encrypted email server that could never be traced back to my location. I attached the video file. I sent the first copy directly to the Disciplinary Committee of the State Medical Board of Georgia. I sent the second copy to the Regional Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically addressing the division that handles severe healthcare fraud and elder abuse. I hit send, closed the laptop, and poured myself another glass of bourbon. The next morning, I woke up feeling more energized and dangerous than I had in a decade. I ordered a lavish breakfast to the penthouse, put on my robe, and opened my surveillance feed. It was exactly 9:15 in the morning. Chloe was in the kitchen, aggressively pacing while applying her expensive makeup, holding her phone pinned to her ear. She was completely unaware that the world outside the walls of my mansion was already collapsing around her associate. Suddenly, her phone buzzed loudly with an incoming call. She answered it with a smug, highly irritated tone. "Gregory, I am busy preparing to go to family court. What do you want?" Even through the camera's microphone, I could hear Dr. Thorne screaming on the other end of the line. His voice was completely unhinged, high-pitched with absolute raw terror. "What did you do?" he roared so loudly that Trey ran into the kitchen looking panicked. "You set me up, you stupid, arrogant little girl. You completely ruined my life." Chloe stopped pacing immediately. The color instantly vanished from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "My license is gone," Thorne screamed, sounding like a man entirely losing his mind. "The medical board just served me with an emergency suspension at my front door." But that is not even the worst part. There are federal agents tearing apart my clinic right now. The FBI has a video, Chloe. They have a crystal clear video of me taking your cash and signing that fake Alzheimer's diagnosis. They know everything. They are seizing my bank assets. They are seizing my patient files. Chloe dropped her makeup brush. It clattered loudly against the marble kitchen counter. "What video?" she gasped, her whole body beginning to tremble violently. "That is impossible." We were alone in the living room. No one else was there. They told me they received an anonymous encrypted file last night. Thorne yelled, his voice breaking. "Someone is watching you, Chloe. Someone recorded us. You dragged me into a federal conspiracy trap. Listen to me very carefully. When the feds put me in an interrogation room, I am not going down alone. I am telling them absolutely everything about you, your husband, and your parents. You better find a good lawyer right now because they are coming for you next." The line went dead. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, staring at her phone as if it were a venomous snake that had just bitten her. The fake medical document she thought was her golden ticket was sitting right there on the kitchen island. Now it was nothing more than a signed confession to a massive federal crime. Trey grabbed her shoulders, shaking her slightly. "Chloe, what happened? Who was that on the phone?" She slowly looked up at her husband, her eyes wide with a brand new suffocating terror. She finally realized that she was not the hunter in this game. She was the prey. And the invisible predator hunting her was not a fragile, confused old man. I smiled at the screen, took a slow bite of my breakfast, and prepared for the next phase of the demolition. I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the Atlanta skyline. My encrypted laptop sat open on the marble table in front of me, broadcasting the live security feed from my mansion. You would think that after the absolute panic Chloe experienced that morning with the corrupt doctor, she would be hiding in a dark room. But arrogance is a very dangerous disease. It blinds you to the reality of your own destruction. Chloe was upstairs, frantically making phone calls to lawyers, trying to save her own skin. Meanwhile, her parents, Richard and Susan, had decided to treat my home like their own personal country club. Through the high-definition camera mounted on the back patio, I watched Richard Albright standing by my custom-built outdoor grill. He was wearing a crisp pastel polo shirt, holding a pair of silver tongs like he was the undisputed king of the world. Susan was lounging on my expensive patio furniture, sipping a glass of my premium imported wine. They had invited about a dozen of their wealthy, snobby friends over for a Sunday barbecue. They were laughing loudly, acting completely entitled, and blissfully unaware that the money keeping their lavish lifestyle afloat had been permanently cut off the day before. I turned up the volume on the laptop to hear what they were celebrating. Richard was holding court, telling a group of men in expensive golf attire about his massive business ventures. He was bragging about his shipping company, acting like a titan of industry. But then the conversation took a turn that made the blood in my veins turn to absolute ice. One of his friends, a red-faced man holding a beer, looked around the expansive backyard and nodded. "It is a beautiful piece of property," Richard the man said. But I have to ask you, why did your daughter and her husband buy a house in this specific neighborhood? The demographics here are just not what we are used to. You know what I mean. Richard let out a loud, condescending laugh that echoed through my patio speakers. Oh, believe me, Bob, I completely agree, Richard said, flipping a steak on my grill. The architecture is surprisingly good for who built it, but the surrounding element is just terrible. You can never truly feel safe with these people walking around. The neighborhood is changing, but it is still full of them. Susan chimed in from her lounge chair, swirling her wine glass with an expression of pure disgust. It is just temporary, she said loudly, making sure everyone heard her. My daughter is dealing with her husband's senile old father right now. Once we get the title of this house away from that crazy old man, we are going to put it straight on the market. We are going to flip this place and move Chloe and Trey to a proper neighborhood, somewhere far away from this kind of crowd. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. These people, this kind of crowd, they were talking about my neighbors. They were talking about the affluent, hardworking black doctors, lawyers, and business owners who had spent decades building this community into a safe haven. They were standing on the grass that I planted, drinking the wine that I bought, using the house that I built to boost their fragile white egos while openly degrading my skin color and my heritage. They thought I was just a broken-down old laborer who had gotten lucky. They thought they were the superior race, superior class, and superior minds. I did not yell at the screen. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. Anger is a useless emotion if you do not forge it into a weapon. I picked up my secure phone and dialed my lead attorney. Nia answered on the second ring. Mr. Wright, she said, her voice sharp and ready. Nia, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I am currently watching a cockroach infest my backyard. His name is Richard Albright. He runs a shipping and logistics company out of Savannah. I want you to tear his financial life completely apart. Do not just look at the surface. I want you to dig into his corporate ledgers, his personal tax returns, his offshore accounts, and his private debts. Leave absolutely no stone unturned. I want to know exactly what this man is made of. Consider it done, Nia replied. I will have my forensic team run a full diagnostic on Albright Logistics. Give me 1 hour. I hung up the phone and kept my eyes on the screen. For the next hour, I watched Richard play the role of the generous millionaire host. I watched him hand out expensive cigars that he had stolen from my private humidor in the study. I watched him act like a master of the universe. Exactly 60 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Nia. I answered and put her on speaker. Mr. Wright, she said, and I could hear the deep satisfaction in her voice. Richard Albright is a walking corpse. His entire life is a mirage. Explain it to me, I said, leaning back in my chair. Albright Logistics is a sinking ship, Nia reported. Richard has been mismanaging his corporate funds for the past 5 years. He lost 2 major shipping contracts last year, and to cover the losses, he started taking out massive high-interest loans from aggressive private equity firms. His company is currently $30 million in debt. He has zero liquidity. He has been dodging collection calls for months. His country club memberships are past due, and his personal luxury estate is 2 months behind on the mortgage. I watched Richard on my screen throwing his head back in laughter at a joke someone told. So how is he still throwing parties, I asked. How is he not in bankruptcy court? Because of your son, Nia explained smoothly. The monthly wire transfers Trey was embezzling from your angel investment fund were the only things keeping Richard out of prison. Trey was literally paying the interest on Richard's corporate debt to keep the creditors at bay. But since you ordered me to freeze Trey's accounts yesterday afternoon, Richard's latest automated payments just bounced hard. He does not know it yet because it is the weekend, but by tomorrow morning the private equity firms are going to declare his loans in default. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Richard thought he was superior to me. He thought he was a self-made millionaire dealing with a poor old black man. But the reality was that his entire existence, his food, his cars, his fake prestige was funded entirely by the spare change falling out of my pocket. Nia continued her report. The 3 private equity firms that hold his debt are ruthless, Mr. Wright. Once the banks open tomorrow, they are going to initiate hostile takeover protocols. They will seize his company, his house, and every asset he has to his name. Richard Albright is going to be completely destroyed by Tuesday. I looked at the screen again. Richard was handing a freshly grilled steak to his wife, smiling brightly. They wanted to steal my house. They wanted to throw me in a mental asylum. They wanted to disrespect my people on my own land. Letting random equity firms destroy him was not good enough for me. That was too impersonal. I wanted to be the one holding the hammer when his glass house shattered. Nia. I said, my tone shifting from observation to absolute command. Contact those 3 private equity firms immediately. I do not care that it is a Sunday. Find the managing partners and get them on the phone. What are you thinking, Mr. Wright? Nia asked, a hint of anticipation in her voice. I want Wright Holdings to purchase Richard Albright's debt. I ordered firmly. Every single penny of it. Buy the corporate loans, buy the private mortgages, buy the liens on his vehicles. Offer the equity firms a 10% premium to sign the transfer papers tonight. Use my personal discretionary fund if you have to. I do not care what it costs. Just get it done. There was a brief silence on the line as Nia processed the sheer magnitude of the aggressive financial maneuver I was demanding. Then she let out a low, impressed laugh. You want to buy his debt so you can be the one to foreclose on him, she asked. No, I replied, my eyes locked on Richard's smiling face on my laptop monitor. I do not just want to foreclose on him. By tomorrow morning, I do not want Richard Albright owing money to random faceless banks. I want him owing money to me. I want to be his supreme creditor. I want to own his failing company. I want to own his cars. I want to own the very bed he sleeps in. He walked into my home acting like a master. It is time I showed him what a real owner looks like. Consider the debt purchased, Mr. Wright, Nia said, her voice fully engaged in the warpath. I will have the legal transfer documents finalized and sitting on your desk before the sun comes up. I hung up the phone and took a sip of my bourbon. The barbecue in my backyard was still going strong, the music was playing, and the wine was flowing. Let them eat, let them drink, and let them celebrate their fake superiority. Because tomorrow the sun was going to rise and the man they thought was a senile, pathetic old beggar was going to send them a bill they could never afford to pay. The trap was fully set, and there was absolutely no way out. I was sitting in the silent luxury of my penthouse when my old burner phone buzzed on the marble table. It was an email notification. For years I had maintained a simple public email address tied to a cheap post office box to keep up my illusion as a retired construction worker. I opened the message, and what I saw made a bitter, hollow laugh escape my chest. It was a scanned document crudely typed in bold, aggressive letters. It was titled Official Notice of Eviction and Property Disposal. It was signed by Chloe. The letter was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated arrogance. She was officially giving me exactly 24 hours to return to the property and clear out what she called my rusty junk from the backyard workshop. She wrote that if I did not remove my trash by tomorrow afternoon, she was hiring a junk removal service to haul it all to the city landfill. My tools were not trash. Those were the heavy iron wrenches, the worn wooden handles of hammers, and the steel levels that had literally built the foundation of the house she was sleeping in. They were the tools that paid for the food Trey ate when he was a growing boy. They were the instruments of my survival in a world that tried to crush me. And this entitled little girl wanted to throw them in a dumpster because they did not match her aesthetic. I opened my encrypted laptop and pulled up the live security feed from the mansion. I needed to see exactly how this decision was made. I switched the camera view to the massive kitchen. Chloe was standing by the marble island holding the physical copy of the letter she had just emailed me. She looked incredibly pleased with herself, sipping her morning coffee as if she had just won a major battle. A few moments later, Trey walked into the kitchen wearing a designer silk robe I had paid for. He looked exhausted, rubbing his temples as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Chloe slid the piece of paper across the marble counter toward him. I sent this to your father's email this morning, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I gave him 24 hours to get his garbage out of the backyard workshop. I am turning that filthy shed into a private yoga studio. It is disgusting that we even kept it this long. I leaned closer to my screen, watching my son's face. I watched the boy I raised. I watched the man whose entire life was built by the sweat equity stored in that very workshop. I waited for him to say no. I waited for him to defend the space where I had taught him how to measure wood, how to build his first soapbox derby car, how to use his hands to create something out of nothing. That workshop was not just a shed, it was the museum of our father and son history. Trey picked up the paper. He read it silently. His eyes scanned the cruel words his wife had written about my life's work. He let out a long, heavy sigh. He did not look angry. He did not look ashamed. He just looked annoyed by the inconvenience of my existence. "Whatever you think is best," Chloe Trey murmured, dropping the paper back onto the counter. "Just make sure he does not cause a scene when he comes to get his things. I do not want him bothering the neighbors. Just keep him away from the main house." He turned his back on the letter, took his coffee, and walked out of the kitchen. I sat in my penthouse completely frozen. I did not feel rage. I did not feel the sudden spike of adrenaline that I had felt when I discovered their financial crimes. What I felt was much deeper and much more permanent. I felt a profound, absolute death inside my chest. Up until that exact second, a very small, foolish part of my heart had held on to a tiny thread of hope. A hope that maybe Trey was just weak. A hope that maybe he was just being manipulated by his vicious wife. A hope that deep down, the son I loved was still in there somewhere, buried under the debt and the lies. But watching him casually agree to throw away my tools, my memories, and my dignity just so his wife could have a yoga studio, extinguished that hope forever. The thread snapped. The father died in that moment, and only the architect remained. And the architect knew exactly how to demolish a condemned building. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Naya. She answered immediately, the sharp professionalism in her voice matching the coldness settling over my soul. "Mr. Wright," she said, "what is our next move?" "Naya," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any paternal mercy. "Chloe just sent me a self-drafted eviction notice. She is trying to kick me out of my own workshop. I think it is time we show her what a real eviction looks like." I heard the quiet rhythmic tapping of Nia typing on her keyboard. "The standard 30-day eviction notice is ready to be filed," she stated, "but considering the circumstances, we can expedite it." "I do not want a 30-day notice," I commanded softly. "I do not want a 14-day notice. I want them out of my house immediately. They committed wire fraud, they attempted to forge a multi-million-dollar commercial mortgage, and they conspired to falsify medical records on my property. They are criminals operating inside a home owned by Wright Holdings. I want an emergency ironclad expulsion order." Nia paused, understanding the absolute severity of what I was asking. "To get an immediate 0-day expulsion order based on criminal activity, we have to bypass the lower housing courts. We have to go straight to a judge with supreme authority." "Then go to Judge Marcus Vance," I told her. Judge Vance was a state Supreme Court judge. But 20 years ago, before he wore the black robe, he was a young, struggling civil rights attorney fighting against corrupt city zoning laws. When no bank would fund his campaign for district attorney, I secretly bankrolled his entire operation. I built the building where he set up his first law practice. He knew exactly who Desmond Wright was, and he knew the power I wielded in the shadows of Atlanta. "I will make the call right now," Naya said, her voice filled with absolute conviction. "I will present the digital evidence of the mortgage forgery and the medical fraud conspiracy. You will have your emergency order by this afternoon. Make sure it has the heavy red seal of the state," I told her. "I want Chloe to feel the weight of it when she reads it." 3 hours later, a secure corporate courier knocked on the heavy wooden doors of my penthouse. He handed me a thick, sealed legal folder. I tipped him and walked over to my desk. I opened the folder and slid the document out. It was beautiful. It was an emergency order of expulsion and asset forfeiture signed personally by State Supreme Court Judge Marcus Vance. The heavy red seal of the state of Georgia was pressed deeply into the bottom corner. It legally stated that due to substantial evidence of financial fraud and elder abuse, Trey and Chloe had absolutely zero rights to the property. They were ordered to vacate the premises immediately upon presentation of the document or face immediate arrest by the county sheriff. It was not a request, it was a legal hammer. I walked over to the sprawling walk-in closet of my suite. Hanging in the center, perfectly pressed and immaculate, was my custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The fabric was midnight black, sharp and unforgiving. I took the heavy legal document, folded it perfectly in half, and slid it into the inside breast pocket of the suit jacket. It rested perfectly over my heart. They wanted to throw my life into a dumpster. They wanted to erase my legacy so they could live in a fake fantasy world. But the illusion was over. Tomorrow I was going to walk through the front doors of my mansion, not as a helpless old man begging for scraps, but as the true king returning to his throne. And I was going to hand them their absolute destruction. I sat in the absolute silence of my penthouse, watching the glowing monitors of my security feed. The sun had set over Atlanta, and my mansion was lit up like a beacon of false prosperity. Tonight was the night of Trey's grand event. He was hosting an exclusive investor showcase for his completely fraudulent software company. He was desperate. I had frozen his bank accounts and cut off the stolen capital he was using to fund his life. He was backed into a corner, and this party was a frantic attempt to charm real venture capitalists into handing over millions of dollars to cover his tracks. Chloe had outdone herself. She had invited the absolute upper crust of Atlanta society. The driveway was packed with exotic cars. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns were strolling through the massive oak doors I had hung myself. They were the city's white elite. Old money heirs, hedge fund managers, and private equity vultures who would normally never step foot in a neighborhood like mine unless they were buying it out to gentrify it. Tonight they were drinking my vintage champagne, walking on my imported hardwood floors, and listening to a string quartet playing softly in my grand foyer. Chloe was floating through the crowd wearing a stunning sapphire dress, smiling radiantly and soaking in the admiration. She was playing the perfect hostess, the supportive wife of a rising tech billionaire. She was desperately trying to validate her existence to the people she considered her peers. She had no idea she was dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. It was time to cast my line. I needed them absolutely drunk on their own arrogance before I pulled the rug out from under them. I picked up my burner phone, the cheap piece of plastic they thought was my only connection to the world. I cleared my throat. I lowered my shoulders even though no one was in the room to see me. I prepared my voice, dropping the deep, authoritative tone of a corporate titan and replacing it with the high, thin, wavering pitch of a terrified, broken old man. I dialed Trey's number. Through the security feed, I saw Trey standing near the marble fireplace surrounded by 3 wealthy older men. He was holding a glass of scotch, nodding eagerly at whatever they were saying. He felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He excused himself from the group and walked quickly down the hall, slipping into the empty study. He answered the phone, his voice tight and irritated. "What do you want, Dad? I am in the middle of a major event. You are supposed to be packing your garbage." I did not speak right away. I forced a wet, ragged breath into the receiver. I made a soft, pathetic, whimpering sound, letting my voice crack completely. "Trey," I whispered, making sure I sounded absolutely terrified. "Please, son, please do not throw my tools away." Trey sighed loudly, a sound of profound annoyance. "Dad, I told you Chloe is handling the workshop. You have the eviction notice. You have until tomorrow." I let out a sob. It was a masterclass in deception. I poured every ounce of vulnerability I could fake into the microphone. "I have nowhere to go, Trey. I am an old man. I do not have any money. I do not understand what is happening to me. I just want to stay in my house. Please, son, I am begging you." On the screen, I saw the study door open. Chloe marched in, her eyes flashing with irritation. She walked over to Trey and whispered aggressively, asking who was on the phone. Trey mouthed the word, "My dad." Chloe rolled her eyes and reached for the phone, putting it on speaker so she could hear. "Listen to me," I continued, my voice shaking violently. "I received the eviction paper. I know I cannot fight you. I know my mind is not right anymore." Chloe was right. "I am confused. I am so confused, Trey. But please do not throw me on the street." I watched Chloe's face light up with a wicked, malicious joy. The fake eviction notice had worked exactly as she hoped. She thought she had completely broken my spirit. She thought the fear of homelessness had shattered whatever defiance I had left. "What do you want, old man?" Chloe said, loudly, leaning into the phone. I swallowed hard, playing the part of the defeated victim. "I will give you the house," I whimpered. "I will sign the deed over to Trey completely. You do not have to fight me in court. You do not have to call a doctor. I will sign the full property transfer tonight. Whatever papers you want." Trey and Chloe looked at each other. The greed in their eyes was so bright it practically glowed through the security camera. They had been trying to forge my signature to steal a $5 million mortgage just yesterday. Now the actual owner of the property was offering to sign it all away willingly. To them, this was the ultimate victory. This was the golden ticket that would solve all their massive financial disasters. "What is the catch?" Chloe demanded, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "No catch," I sobbed softly. "Just please let me keep the small storage room in the basement, the one near the boiler. It is dark and out of the way. I will not come upstairs. I will not bother your guests. I will not even use the main kitchen. Just let me put a small cot down there." I will sign the whole estate over to you if you just let me die in the basement of the house I built." It was the most pathetic, humiliating plea a father could ever make to a son. It was an offer to become a prisoner in the dark, damp bowels of my own home just to avoid the streets. I waited to see if Trey had even a single drop of human decency left in his soul. I waited to see if hearing his father beg to live in a boiler room would break the spell of his greed. It did not. Trey looked at Chloe. She smiled a sharp, triumphant predator's smile and gave him a firm nod. "All right, Dad," Trey said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you are ready to be reasonable and sign the deed over legally, we can make an arrangement. But you have to do it tonight. I have investors here and I need to prove that my asset portfolio is secure." "I will come right now," I whispered, acting breathless with relief. "I will walk over. I just want this to be over. You do exactly what I tell you." Chloe interrupted, her voice commanding and cold. "You do not walk through the front door. You do not let any of my guests see you. You walk down the alley and approach the back service gate. I have security guards posted. I will tell them to let you in through the servant entrance. You wait in the mudroom until I bring the papers. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Chloe," I whimpered. "The back gate. The mudroom. I understand. Thank you. Thank you so much." I hung up the phone. I sat in my penthouse and took a deep, steadying breath. The pathetic old man vanished into the thin air, leaving only the architect behind. On the screen, I watched Chloe grab Trey by the lapels of his tuxedo and kiss him hard. "We did it," she whispered excitedly. "He completely broke. He's going to sign the house over. We take the deed to the bank tomorrow, unfreeze the accounts, and we are saved." "What about the basement?" Trey asked, looking a little uneasy. "Are we really going to let him live down there?" Chloe laughed, a dark, heartless sound. "Are you stupid, Trey? Once his signature is on that deed, this is my property. The second the ink dries, I am having the security guards drag him out the back gate and throw him in the street. He is never setting foot in this house again." I watched her smooth down her beautiful sapphire dress, check her reflection in the study mirror, and march back out into the party to mingle with her wealthy guests. She felt like an absolute queen. She had conquered the old man. She had secured the castle. Through the exterior cameras, I watched her walk out to the back patio in the freezing rain, holding an umbrella. She approached the two massive private security guards she had hired for the night. "Listen to me carefully," she told the guards, pointing toward the alley. "In about 20 minutes, a crazy old man looking like a homeless beggar is going to come to this gate. Let him into the mudroom, but do not let him take another step into the main house. I am going to have him sign a legal document. The absolute second I have that paper in my hand, you two are going to grab him by the arms, drag him out of this neighborhood, and make sure he never comes back. If he screams, cover his mouth. I do not want my guests disturbed." The guards nodded, strictly following the orders of the woman paying their salary. I closed the laptop. The stage was set. The audience was gathered. The villains were standing exactly on the trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. I stood up and walked into my expansive closet. I reached past the flannel shirts and the old denim. I pulled out a custom-tailored midnight black Tom Ford suit. I put on a crisp white silk shirt and fastened a pair of heavy platinum cufflinks. I slid my feet into polished Italian leather shoes. Finally, I reached into my velvet watch box and strapped a solid gold Patek Philippe timepiece to my wrist. I walked over to the mirror. I did not look like a retired construction worker begging for a cot in the basement. I looked like the multi-billion-dollar chairman of Wright Holdings. I looked like the king. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket, feeling the heavy, crisp paper of the emergency expulsion order signed by the Supreme Court judge. Chloe wanted me to come through the alley like a rat. She wanted me to hide in the shadows so her elite guests would not see the dirty old man who built her world. But a king does not use the servant entrance. A king kicks the front doors wide open. I picked up my secure phone and called my head of security. "Bring the motorcade around," I ordered. "It is time to go home." The rain was still pouring over Atlanta, washing the streets clean, but inside the back of my armored black SUV it was perfectly silent. I sat in the plush leather seat, staring out the tinted windows as my three-vehicle motorcade glided through the wealthy, tree-lined streets of my neighborhood. I was no longer the tired, stooped old man in the faded flannel shirt. I was wearing a midnight black, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than the cars most people drove. My white silk shirt was crisp, and the heavy, solid gold Patek Philippe watch on my wrist gleamed faintly in the low light of the cabin. For years I had hidden this version of myself. I had buried the billionaire chairman under the guise of a humble retired construction worker because I wanted my son to build his own pride. I wanted him to be a man. But Trey had proven that he was nothing more than a coward hiding behind a wicked racist woman. They wanted to throw me into a dark alley and steal my life. It was time to show them that you do not invite a wolf into your house and expect it to behave like a sheep. As my motorcade turned onto my street, I could see the massive mansion lit up like a jewel. The driveway was completely packed with Ferraris, Bentleys, and high-end Mercedes sedans. A team of valet drivers in white shirts were rushing around under umbrellas, trying to manage the chaotic overflow of arrogant wealth. My lead driver did not slow down. He did not ask for permission to enter. He drove the massive, heavy SUV directly up the center of the circular driveway, forcing two valet drivers to jump out of the way. The other two SUVs in my convoy flanked us, effectively blocking the entire front entrance. The valets stood frozen, completely unsure of what to do. This was not the arrival of a mere guest. This was a display of absolute aggressive power. My personal security chief, a giant of a man named Marcus, stepped out of the front passenger seat. He opened his umbrella and opened my door. I stepped out into the humid Georgia night. I did not hunch my shoulders. I did not shuffle my feet. I stood at my full 6'2" height, my posture perfectly straight, carrying the weight of a man who commanded thousands of employees and billions of dollars. I looked up at the grand marble steps of the house I had built. The heavy oak double doors were wide open to let the cool night breeze circulate through the packed party. From where I stood at the bottom of the steps, I could see directly into the grand foyer. Chloe was standing right inside the entryway holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was laughing loudly at a joke someone had just told, playing the perfect elegant hostess. Then her eyes drifted toward the driveway to see who had just arrived in such an imposing motorcade. I watched her face freeze. I watched her eyes lock onto me. At first there was total confusion. She saw a tall, powerful black man in an impeccably tailored luxury suit surrounded by professional security. But then her eyes moved up to my face, and the recognition hit her like a physical blow. The confusion instantly morphed into absolute unhinged rage. She slammed her champagne flute down on a nearby side table so hard the crystal nearly shattered. She completely abandoned her wealthy guests and stormed out the front doors, marching onto the covered porch. Her face was flushed red with anger, her perfectly styled hair catching the damp wind. "What the hell are you doing at the front door?" she hissed, her voice a venomous, furious whisper. She looked me up and down, taking in the designer suit, the silk tie, and the gold watch. Her eyes widened with a new kind of panic. "Where did you get those clothes? Did you break into one of the guest rooms upstairs? Did you steal from my parents?" I did not stop walking. I took a slow, deliberate step up the marble stairs. My security chief walked silently right behind me. "I told you to go to the alley," Chloe commanded, her voice rising in volume as she realized I was not stopping. "You were supposed to wait in the mudroom. If you think you are coming inside my party looking like a dressed-up thief to beg for money, you are completely out of your mind. Get back out into the rain and walk around the back before I call the police and have you arrested for grand larceny." Just then, Trey appeared in the doorway behind her. He had seen her storm out and rushed over to stop a scene. When he saw me standing there looking like the corporate titan I truly was, his jaw literally dropped. He grabbed the doorframe to steady himself. "Dad," Trey gasped, his voice trembling violently. "What are you doing? Where did you steal that suit? You have lost your mind. The police are going to throw you in jail. You need to take that off and go to the back gate right now. Please, before the investors see you." "Investors," I said softly. My voice was deep resonant and completely stripped of the pathetic, wavering tone I had used on the phone an hour ago. "You mean the men inside drinking my champagne?" Chloe stepped forward, physically trying to block the massive double doors with her body. "You are not stepping 1 foot inside this house, you crazy old fool. Guards!" She turned her head and screamed toward the side of the house. "Guards, get over here right now." The 2 massive private security guards she had hired came running around the corner of the porch. They looked at me, then looked at my own security chief, clearly hesitating. "Grab him!" Chloe shrieked, pointing her manicured finger right at my face. "He is a delusional old man who stole a guest's clothing. Drag him out to the street and do not let him back on the property." The guards took a step forward, but my security chief simply unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the tactical firearm holstered at his hip. He gave them a single terrifying look. The 2 hired guards instantly froze, raising their hands and slowly backing away. They were paid $20 an hour. They were not going to die for a crazy woman in a blue dress. Chloe gasped, looking around frantically as her authority completely evaporated. Trey was hyperventilating, backing away from the door. I stepped up onto the porch. I looked down at Chloe, who was now trembling with a mixture of fury and sudden, inexplicable fear. "Move," I said quietly. She did not move, so I simply walked forward, forcing her to stumble backward out of my way to avoid being trampled. I crossed the threshold and stepped into the blinding light of the grand foyer. The string quartet was playing a soft classical piece in the corner. The massive living room was packed with over 100 of Atlanta's most elite venture capitalists, real estate developers, and private equity managers. These were the people Trey was desperately trying to impress to save his fraudulent tech company. These were the people Chloe wanted to rule over. As I walked into the center of the room, Chloe came running in right behind me, completely losing whatever shred of sanity she had left. "Stop looking at him," she yelled to her guests, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Somebody call the police. This man is a thief. He is an intruder. He is my husband's crazy father, and he broke in here to steal." The music abruptly stopped. The string quartet lowered their instruments. The entire room went dead silent. 100 pairs of eyes turned to look at the commotion. They looked at Chloe, screaming like a madwoman, and then they looked at me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, adjusting my platinum cufflinks. I waited for the realization to set in. I did not have to wait long. Standing near the fireplace was Arthur Sterling, the most ruthless, powerful venture capitalist in the entire state of Georgia. He was the man Trey was depending on to write a massive check tonight. Arthur was holding a glass of scotch, frowning at Chloe's screaming, but when his eyes landed on me, his entire demeanor changed. The color drained from Arthur's face. He quickly put his glass down on the marble mantel. He aggressively buttoned his suit jacket, smoothing his tie with nervous, shaking hands. He pushed past Trey, who was standing frozen in shock, and walked directly toward me. Arthur did not call for security. He did not look at me with pity. He stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me, lowered his head, and extended his hand with the utmost reverence. "Chairman Wright." Arthur said, his voice echoing loudly in the completely silent room. "I had absolutely no idea you were going to be in attendance tonight. It is an absolute honor to see you, sir." Chloe stopped breathing. Her mouth hung open. She looked at Arthur, then looked at me. Her brain completely short-circuiting. Suddenly, a domino effect ripped through the entire ballroom. A senior partner from Goldman Sachs stepped forward, bowing his head. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman." The president of the largest real estate firm in the South practically shoved his way to the front. "Mr. Wright, it is a privilege. We have been trying to get a meeting with your office for 6 months. One by one, the most powerful, arrogant, wealthy white men and women in Atlanta, the very people Chloe worshipped and groveled to, were stepping forward, lowering their heads and addressing me with pure, unadulterated fear and respect. To Chloe and Trey, I was a dirty, broke, old laborer. But to the masters of the financial universe standing in that room, I was the undisputed king. I looked at Trey. He looked like he was going to vomit. His legs gave out and he collapsed onto a nearby chair, burying his face in his hands as the reality of what he had done finally crushed him. Then I slowly turned my head and looked directly into Chloe's horrified, widened eyes. She was shaking so violently, her expensive diamond earrings were rattling. The smug, racist, entitled woman who had just tried to throw me into a dark alley was now staring at the most powerful man in the room. I gave her a slow, extremely cold smile. "Good evening, Chloe," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly over the dead silent crowd. "I told you I would come to sign the papers, but it seems you misunderstood exactly who owns this house." The silence in the grand foyer was so heavy it felt like it could crush the breath right out of your lungs. 100 of Atlanta's most powerful people were staring at me with absolute reverence, and staring at my son and his wife with mounting confusion and horror. I did not bask in their worship. I had not come here for their applause. I had come to dismantle a lie. At the far end of the massive living room was a raised stage. It was set up with a sleek glass podium and a massive digital screen that was currently displaying the sleek modern logo of Apex Technologies. That was where my son Trey had been planning to stand and beg these wealthy investors for their money to cover up the millions he had stolen from me. I began to walk slowly toward that stage. The crowd parted for me instantly. Billionaires and power brokers stepped aside, lowering their eyes as I passed. Trey was still slumped in a chair, unable to even look up. but Chloe was completely unraveling. The reality that the dirty old man she had banished to the rain was actually the puppet master of her entire existence was short-circuiting her brain. She saw me heading for the microphone, and panic finally overrode her shock. "You cannot go up there," she screamed, her voice cracking as she frantically pushed her way through the crowd of her own guests. "This is my house. This is my event. Stop him. Someone stop him right now." She lunged toward the stage, reaching her hands out frantically to grab the microphone from the podium. But she never even made it up the first step. My security chief, Marcus, stepped smoothly into her path. He did not hurt her. He did not even raise his hands. He simply stood there, an immovable wall of muscle and custom-tailored fabric. Chloe slammed into his chest and bounced back, almost falling over her expensive high heels. "Move!" she shrieked hysterically, hitting Marcus on the arm. "Get out of my way, you giant thug!" Marcus did not blink. He just looked down at her with absolute cold indifference. "You need to step back, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the silent room. I stepped up to the glass podium and adjusted the microphone. I looked out over the sea of wealthy faces. I saw Arthur Sterling standing in the front row watching me with rapt attention. I saw Richard and Susan, Chloe's arrogant parents, standing frozen by the fireplace, the color completely drained from their entitled faces. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system I had personally paid for. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Desmond Wright. I am the founder and chairman of Wright Holdings, and until about an hour ago, the woman screaming at the bottom of these stairs believed I was a homeless beggar trespassing in her home. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People turned to stare at Chloe, who was now trembling with humiliation, her face bright red. "You see," I continued, gripping the edges of the podium, "I believe that wealth is a tool, not an identity. When my son Trey decided to enter the business world, I stepped back. I lived quietly in a small room on the ground floor of this estate. I wore my old construction clothes. I drove my old work truck. I wanted to see what kind of man he would become when he thought he was the king of the castle. I wanted to see how he and his new bride would treat the people they believed were beneath them." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink into the silent room. "Unfortunately, I found out," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I found out that my son and his wife are not entrepreneurs. They are parasites. And tonight they gathered all of you here to ask for your money to cover up the fact that they have been bleeding my accounts dry." Trey let out a loud, pathetic sob from the corner of the room, but I ignored him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted phone. I synced it directly to the massive presentation screen behind me. The Apex Technologies logo vanished instantly. In its place, a highly magnified, scanned document appeared on the massive screen. It was on official medical letterhead featuring the heavy stamp of a licensed physician. "This," I announced, pointing to the screen, "is a medical certificate diagnosing me with severe terminal Alzheimer's disease. It declares me a danger to myself and completely incapable of managing my own assets. It was signed just last night in this very living room by Dr. Gregory Thorne." Whispers broke out among the guests. Several prominent doctors and hospital board members in the crowd leaned in to read the document, their faces twisting with professional disgust. "But there is a slight problem with this diagnosis," I continued. "Dr. Thorne never examined me. In fact, he never even saw me. He signed this piece of paper because my daughter-in-law Chloe handed him a heavy envelope containing $50,000 in stolen cash." "That is a lie," Chloe shrieked from the floor, pointing wildly at me. "He is lying. He doctored that document. He is trying to ruin us because he is insane. Do not listen to him." I did not argue with her. I simply pressed a button on my phone. The audio recording I had captured through the hidden surveillance system boomed out over the party speakers. The sound quality was flawless. Everyone in the room heard Dr. Thorne's slick, arrogant voice. "You are asking me to falsify a terminal cognitive decline diagnosis for a man I have not even taken a basic blood pressure reading on." Then they heard Chloe's voice, loud and clear, dripping with desperate malice. "Everyone has a price, Gregory. Name it." Then the sound of the doctor demanding $50,000 cash. And finally Chloe's chilling response. "This is it. Tomorrow morning we take this straight to the judge. We get the emergency conservatorship approved. We take back the house, and we force the bank to unfreeze the accounts." The old man is finished. The audio clipped off. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. The high society elite of Atlanta stared at Chloe with pure, undisguised revulsion. She had just been exposed not only as a fraud but as a ruthless criminal who tried to mentally enslave her own father-in-law for his money. Chloe's mother, Susan, put her hand to her mouth, looking like she was going to be sick. Her father, Richard, stared at the floor, completely humiliated. But I was not done. I looked down at Chloe, who was now openly weeping, shaking her head as her entire fake social empire collapsed into ash. "You told everyone this was your house, Chloe?" I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You told my son to force me into the freezing rain because I was ruining your aesthetic. You planned to lock me in a padded room so you could steal the deed to this property." I pulled the folded legal document from the inside pocket of my Tom Ford suit. "But you made one fatal miscalculation," I told her, holding the heavy paper up for the crowd to see. "Trey never owned this mansion. His name was never on the deed. This entire estate, the ground it sits on, the walls that surround you, and the very floor you are crying on, belongs entirely to a subsidiary of Right Holdings." The crowd murmured in shock. I looked over at Trey, who was now staring at me with hollow, empty eyes. He knew exactly what was coming next. "I allowed you to live here as a courtesy," I explained, my voice cold and unrelenting. It was a loan, a father trying to give his son a beautiful place to start a family. But that loan was contingent on respect and basic human decency. You violated those terms the moment you tried to erase my existence. And so, the loan is officially terminated. Right on cue, the heavy oak front doors swung wide open. The timing was so perfect it almost felt cinematic. Heavy boots marched into the grand foyer. It was Sheriff Thomas Hayes, an old friend of mine from the days when we were both young men trying to survive in a city that did not want us to succeed. He was fully uniformed, accompanied by 4 heavily armed deputies. The wealthy guests parted immediately, stepping back to make way for the law enforcement officers. Sheriff Hayes walked straight to the front of the stage, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. He looked at Trey and Chloe with absolute zero sympathy. "Sheriff Hayes," I said, nodding respectfully to my old friend. "Mr. Wright," the sheriff replied, giving me a firm nod. He walked over to the glass podium and I handed him the document bearing the heavy red seal of the state Supreme Court. Sheriff Hayes unrolled the document and turned to face Trey and Chloe. His voice was loud, authoritative, and brooked absolutely no arguments. "Trey Wright and Chloe Wright," the sheriff announced, holding up the emergency expulsion order. "I hold in my hand an emergency order of expulsion and asset forfeiture signed by the state Supreme Court. Due to credible evidence of financial fraud, elder abuse, and criminal conspiracy, you have been stripped of all residential privileges on this property immediately." Chloe let out a gut-wrenching wail. "No," she screamed, falling to her knees on the hardwood floor. "You cannot do this. We have nowhere to go. My clothes are upstairs. My life is here. You cannot throw us out in the rain." Sheriff Hayes looked down at her, completely unmoved by her tears. He checked his heavy wristwatch. "You have exactly 30 minutes to gather whatever personal clothing you can fit into 2 standard suitcases," he commanded. "My deputies will escort you upstairs and watch your every move. You will not touch any jewelry, any electronics, or any items of significant value, as those are currently frozen under a corporate asset investigation. If you are not out of those front doors in 30 minutes, you will be leaving in handcuffs. The clock starts right now. Move." 2 deputies stepped forward, grabbing Chloe by the arms and hauling her to her feet. Another deputy hauled Trey out of his chair. The golden couple, the fake king and queen of Atlanta society, were being marched up the stairs of my house like common criminals in front of the most powerful people in the state. And I stood at the podium, watching them go, feeling the cold, satisfying weight of absolute justice. As the heavily armed deputies moved forward to escort my son and his vicious wife up the grand staircase, the reality of the situation finally shattered the last remaining pieces of Trey's fragile ego. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, dragging her feet as the officers pulled her by the arms, but Trey did something that completely surprised the entire room. He violently wrenched his shoulder free from the deputy holding him. The deputy reached for his tactical belt, ready to take him down to the floor, but I simply raised my hand, signaling the officer to hold on for just a moment. Trey stumbled forward and fell hard onto his knees right at the base of the glass podium where I was standing. He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, his custom-tailored tuxedo wrinkling against the polished hardwood floor. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice echoing with a pathetic desperation that made my stomach turn. You can take the house. You can kick us out into the street, but please do not do this right now. My company is everything to me. The most important investors in the city are standing right here in this room. If you do this in front of them, you will destroy my entire business. I am begging you, Dad. Do not take my empire away from me." I looked down at the boy I had raised. He was completely terrified, but his terror was entirely misplaced. Even in the face of his own mother-in-law trying to steal my property and throw me into a mental asylum, all Trey cared about was his fake reputation. He actually believed he had built an empire. He actually thought he was a self-made man standing on the verge of incredible wealth. I leaned closer to the microphone. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of any parental warmth. "Your empire," I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the silent ballroom. "Trey, an empire is built on a solid foundation. It is built on hard work, late nights, and actual tangible value. What you have built is not an empire. It is a house of cards sitting on a foundation of absolute deceit. And tonight, a very strong wind has come to blow it all down." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted smartphone once again. I tapped the screen, syncing a new set of documents to the massive digital display mounted on the stage behind me. "I want all of you to look closely at the screen," I announced, addressing the crowd of elite venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. "My son invited you here tonight to ask for your capital. He promised you that Apex Technologies was on the verge of launching a revolutionary software platform. He told you he had already secured $2.5 million in initial seed funding from a highly exclusive anonymous syndicate out of Silicon Valley." I paused, watching Arthur Sterling and the other prominent investors lean forward, their eyes fixed on the massive screen. That was his first lie, I stated plainly. There is no anonymous syndicate in Silicon Valley. 3 years ago, when my son told me he wanted to enter the tech industry, I decided to give him the head start I never had. I used a shell corporation owned entirely by Wright Holdings to inject $2.5 million into his startup. I was his only angel investor. I gave him that money because I wanted him to learn how to build something real. Trey stayed on his knees, staring up at me with his mouth completely open. The shock on his face was absolute. For 3 years, he had strutted around Atlanta bragging about how he had charmed a room full of brilliant tech billionaires into backing his genius vision. He had looked down on me thinking I was just a simple construction worker who could never understand his complex corporate world. Now he realized that the very money funding his arrogance came directly from the calloused hands he despised. But I was not done. I tapped the screen again, and a massive, highly detailed financial spreadsheet appeared. The numbers were highlighted in bright red. If my son had actually used that money to build a software company, I would have been the proudest father in this city. I continued, my voice growing colder with every word. But unfortunately, Trey did not hire a single software engineer. He did not rent a single server. He did not write a single line of code. Instead, he treated my corporate investment fund like his own personal piggy bank. I gestured to the screen where the itemized bank statements were displayed for everyone to read. Over the last 36 months, Trey systematically embezzled exactly $2 million of company funds. I explained, exposing his crimes to the very people he was trying to impress. He funneled the capital into private offshore accounts to hide his tracks. He used investor money to buy a customized Porsche in cash. He used it to buy designer handbags and luxury vacations for his wife. And most disgustingly, he used hundreds of thousands of dollars to quietly pay off the massive corporate debts of his wife's parents, Richard and Susan Albright, just so they would accept him into their racist, elitist family. A collective murmur of deep professional disgust swept through the ballroom. The wealthy investors in the crowd were ruthless people, but the one thing they absolutely hated more than anything else was a fraud who stole investor capital. They looked at Trey with pure, unadulterated contempt. Arthur Sterling crossed his arms tightly, shaking his head in absolute disgust. Trey was shaking violently, crying into his hands. "Dad, please stop," he whimpered. "You are ruining my life. I can fix this. I can pay it back. I just need these investors to believe in me. You cannot fix this." "Trey," I said, looking down at him with zero sympathy. "Because you do not have a company anymore." I tapped the screen one final time. A heavy legal document appeared displaying the corporate ownership structure of Apex Technologies. When I provided the initial $2.5 million in seed capital through my shell corporation, I secured exactly 80% equity in your startup, I informed him. You were so desperate for the cash you signed the term sheet without even having a real lawyer read the fine print. You only own 20% of this empty ghost ship, Trey. I am the primary shareholder. I am the chairman of the board. And as the absolute majority owner, I am exercising my legal right to dissolve the corporation effective immediately. Trey let out a choked, desperate gasp. He grabbed the fabric of his trousers, trying to pull himself up, but his legs were too weak. Apex Technologies no longer exists, I announced to the room. All remaining assets are currently frozen and will be liquidated to recover the stolen capital. Any potential investors in this room should consider this presentation a formal warning. My son is not a tech genius. He is a common thief who was planning to use your money to pay off the millions he stole from me. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and brutal. Arthur Sterling, the billionaire venture capitalist Trey had been courting for months, stepped out of the crowd and walked right up to the edge of the stage. He did not even look at me. He looked directly down at Trey, who was still kneeling on the floor. "You are a disgrace," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the silent room like a knife. "You tried to sit at my table and lie to my face while you were actively stealing from your own father. I am going to make a few phone calls before I go to sleep tonight, Trey. I am going to personally ensure that you never raise a single penny in this city ever again. You are completely finished." Arthur turned his back on my son and walked straight toward the front doors. The rest of the elite investors immediately followed his lead. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer any sympathies. They simply turned their backs and began streaming out of the grand foyer, heading out into the rain to call their drivers. In less than 60 seconds, the massive crowd of powerful people completely vanished, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and a chilling silence. Trey was left kneeling on the hardwood floor completely alone. His fake startup was legally destroyed. His reputation in the financial world was permanently obliterated. The millions of dollars he thought he controlled were gone. In the span of a few short minutes, he had gone from a rising tech CEO hosting a gala in a multi-million-dollar mansion to an absolute nobody facing federal fraud charges and immediate eviction. Sheriff Hayes stepped forward, resting his hand heavily on Trey's shoulder. "Your 30 minutes are almost up, son," the sheriff said, his voice offering no comfort whatsoever. "I highly suggest you go upstairs and pack your bags, because whether you have a company or not, you are still trespassing on this property." The deputy hauled Trey to his feet. My son looked completely hollowed out, as if his very soul had been ripped from his chest. He did not look at me again as the deputies marched him up the grand staircase. He had absolutely nothing left, and he knew that he had brought every single ounce of this destruction upon himself. The grand foyer felt massive and hollow now that the elite guests had fled into the freezing rainy night. The string quartet had long since packed their instruments and run out the back door. Only the heavy breathing of Sheriff Hayes and his deputies remained echoing off the vaulted ceilings as they hauled my son Trey and his vicious wife Chloe up the sweeping marble staircase to pack their pathetic bags. But two people had not moved an inch: Richard and Susan Albright. Chloe's arrogant parents were still standing near the massive stone fireplace. For a few minutes they had been completely paralyzed by the sheer shock of watching their daughter's fake empire crumble to dust. But as the severe reality set in, that initial shock rapidly morphed into a fiery, entitled rage. Richard's face turned a violent shade of crimson. He marched across the imported hardwood floors, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Susan followed closely behind him, her high heels clicking sharply against the wood. They marched right up to the base of the glass podium, where I stood, refusing to accept that the balance of power had completely shifted. "You listen to me, you arrogant thug," Richard spat, his voice trembling with an uncontrollable fury. "You think you can just march in here wearing a fancy custom suit and humiliate my daughter in front of the entire city. I do not care how much money you claim to have or what kind of corrupt shell companies you run in the shadows. To me, you are nothing but a common, uneducated laborer playing dress-up. I know the mayor of Atlanta. I know the governor. I have a massive team of elite corporate lawyers who will tie you up in endless litigation for the rest of your miserable life. You are going to pay dearly for what you did to my family tonight." Susan crossed her arms tightly over her chest, nodding in aggressive agreement. "You are a complete monster," she hissed, her face twisted in a mask of ugly superiority. "Chloe is a delicate, sophisticated girl. She married into your broken family in good faith, and you set out to completely destroy her. We are decent people. We come from a long, esteemed line of respected Southern families. You will never be one of us, no matter how many billions of dollars you steal from the system. We are going to sue you for defamation for emotional distress and for anything else our legal team can possibly think of. I did not interrupt them. I let them vent their pathetic racist frustrations. I stood at the podium looking down at them with the exact same cold, absolute indifference I used when inspecting a cracked concrete foundation. They were so utterly blinded by their own unearned sense of superiority that they had completely forgotten what they had done just a few hours earlier. They forgot that they had stood in my dead wife's private bedroom greedily plotting to sell her vintage jewelry to fund their lifestyle. They forgot that they were nothing more than parasites actively feeding on my son's stolen money. When they finally ran out of breath and stood there panting with rage, I motioned for my lead attorney, Nia. She had been standing quietly in the shadows of the grand hall, observing the entire pathetic display. She walked forward, her heels clicking rhythmically, and handed me a thick black leather folder. I opened it slowly and deliberately, letting the silence stretch out until it became absolutely suffocating for them. "You know, Richard?" I said, my voice low and incredibly calm. "For a man who claims to come from a long-esteemed line of old money, you certainly have a very interesting definition of wealth." I pulled a thick stack of financial documents from the folder, holding them up under the bright chandelier light. "Let us talk about Albright Logistics," I proposed, looking directly into his angry eyes. "Your shipping company has been functionally bankrupt for the last 5 years. You lost your biggest delivery contracts. You mismanaged your corporate payroll. You took out massive high-interest loans from predatory private equity firms just to keep the lights on and maintain your expensive country club memberships." Richard's face went completely pale. The aggressive red flush in his cheeks vanished instantly, leaving him looking like a very sick and tired old man. His pointing finger slowly dropped to his side. "How do you know about my company?" he stammered, his voice suddenly losing all of its arrogant thunder. "Because, Richard, my son was the only thing keeping you out of a federal bankruptcy court," I explained, making sure my voice carried clearly to where Chloe was standing on the staircase balcony, clutching her hastily packed suitcase. "Trey was embezzling millions of dollars from my private investment fund, and he was wiring you $50,000 every single month just to cover the crippling interest on your massive corporate debts. He paid for your luxury car leases. He paid the overdue mortgage on your suburban estate. He bought your fake affection with my hard-earned money." Susan gasped loudly, grabbing her husband's arm as if she needed physical support to stay standing. "Richard, tell him he is lying," she pleaded, her voice cracking with sudden panic. "Tell him our money is real. Tell him our business is fine." But Richard could not speak a single word. He was staring at the documents in my hand, his eyes wide with absolute paralyzing terror. But here's the most interesting part of the story. Richard was continued flipping to the final legal document in the heavy folder. "When I froze Trey's accounts yesterday afternoon, your automated debt payments bounced hard. Your private equity lenders immediately declared your massive loans in default. They were preparing to tear your entire shipping company apart tomorrow morning. But I simply could not let strangers have all the fun." I leaned forward, resting my hands firmly on the edges of the glass podium. I looked directly into his terrified eyes, making sure he felt the full weight of my power. "At 3:00 this afternoon, Wright Holdings purchased every single penny of your corporate and personal debt," I declared. "I paid a 10% premium to acquire it all in pure cash. I own your failing shipping company. I own the financial leases on your luxury vehicles. I am your absolute supreme creditor." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely physically paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his ruin. "And because you are officially in severe default," I said, my voice dropping to a low whisper that echoed like thunder across the marble floor. "I exercised my legal right as the primary debt holder exactly 1 hour ago. Mr. Richard, your company has just been formally liquidated by my asset management fund. The business is gone. Your cars will be aggressively repossessed by dawn, and tomorrow morning my bank will foreclose on your beautiful suburban estate. You are completely bankrupt, Richard. You do not have a single dime to your name." The physical impact of my words hit Richard like a speeding freight train. He let out a sharp, choking gasp. His hands flew to his chest, frantically grabbing the fabric of his pastel polo shirt. His eyes rolled back into his head and his knees completely buckled beneath him. He collapsed hard onto the polished hardwood floor, gasping desperately for air. It was a mild, stress-induced heart attack, the physical manifestation of his entire fake empire crushing his body all at once. Susan dropped to her knees beside him, screaming hysterically and begging for someone to call an ambulance. From the top of the grand staircase, a piercing, agonizing wail tore through the air. Chloe had heard absolutely everything. She stood at the wooden railing, gripping her cheap plastic suitcase, staring down at her father, writhing in pain on the floor. The horrible, crushing reality finally settled over her completely. She had no home to sleep in tonight. Her husband was a penniless criminal facing severe federal fraud charges. And now the wealthy safety net of her arrogant parents was completely obliterated. They were all entirely destitute. Chloe dropped to her knees on the stairs, sobbing with a level of despair that shook her entire body. The high society life she had lied, cheated, and stolen for was gone forever, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the damp clothes on her back and a future filled with nothing but misery. The wail of ambulance sirens pierced the heavy storm outside, cutting through the thick, suffocating tension inside my grand foyer. 2 paramedics rushed through the open front doors, kneeling beside Richard Albright, who was still gasping on the polished hardwood floor. Susan hovered over him, her expensive makeup completely ruined by her hysterical tears. She looked up at me with eyes full of pure venom, blaming me for her husband's weak heart. But I felt absolutely nothing for them. They had dug their own graves, and now they were simply falling into them. From the grand staircase, Chloe slowly began to descend. She had left her cheap plastic suitcase at the top of the landing. I watched her walk down the marble steps, and I saw the exact moment her profound despair mutated into something incredibly toxic and violent. She did not rush to her father's side. She did not kneel beside the paramedics to hold Richard's hand. Instead, she marched directly toward her husband. Trey was still standing near the center of the room, looking like a hollow shell of a human being. He reached his hand out toward his wife, desperately needing a single shred of comfort in the middle of his absolute ruin. "Chloe, stop," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We will figure this out. We can start over." She did not reach for his hand. She did not offer him the warm embrace of a loving partner. Instead, Chloe raised her right arm and swung it with all the furious strength she had left in her body. The slap echoed through the massive foyer like a gunshot. It was so hard and so violent that Trey's head snapped to the side and he stumbled backward, nearly losing his balance. A bright red handprint instantly bloomed across his cheek. He looked at her with wide, terrified eyes, completely shocked by the physical assault. "You absolutely useless, pathetic loser," Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. "You lied to me. You promised me the world. You told me you were the sole heir to a massive fortune. You told me this multi-million-dollar estate was yours." Trey held his hand to his burning cheek, tears streaming down his face. "Chloe, please," he begged. "I did it all for you. I took that money to give you the life you wanted. I paid your parents' debts so they would accept me. I did it because I love you. You think I care about your love?" Chloe shrieked, stepping closer and pushing him hard in the chest with both hands. "You think I married you for love? I married you because you were supposed to be a blank check. I endured the whispers from my friends. I convinced my parents to accept you into our family because you promised me an empire. You said your father was just an ignorant old laborer who was going to die soon and leave you everything. But you are not an heir. You are just a broke, pathetic criminal playing dress-up with someone else's money." The absolute viciousness of her words hung in the cold air. She had just publicly confessed to the entire transactional nature of their marriage. She did not love my son. She never had. She tolerated his skin color and his presence strictly because she thought he held the keys to a vast, hidden fortune. And now that the fortune was gone, the mask was completely removed. She hated him. She despised him for failing to deliver the stolen goods. Trey looked at her as if she had just driven a knife directly into his heart. For 3 years he had turned his back on his own father. He had stolen my money, forged my signature, and tried to lock me in a mental asylum, all to please a woman who viewed him as nothing more than an ATM. He traded his soul for a fake plastic smile. And now he was entirely bankrupt in every possible sense of the word. Chloe turned away from him in absolute disgust. "I am filing for divorce the second the sun comes up," she spat venomously. "I will not spend one single night sleeping next to a broke felon. Do not ever speak to me again." Trey fell to his knees on the marble floor. He had lost his company. He had lost his social standing. And now the wife he had sacrificed everything for had thrown him away like garbage. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically, looking for any possible lifeline. The paramedics were wheeling Richard out on a stretcher. Susan was following them out into the rain without even glancing back at her son-in-law. The sheriff and his deputies stood by, watching the miserable scene unfold with cold professionalism. Trey's desperate eyes finally landed on me. I was still standing behind the glass podium, the undisputed architect of his complete destruction. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, sliding across the polished hardwood floor like a wounded animal. He reached the base of the podium and reached his hands out, desperately grabbing the fabric of my tailored trousers. He pressed his face against my polished Italian leather shoes, sobbing so hard his entire body shook. "Dad," he wailed, his voice unrecognizable, choked with panic and profound regret. "Dad, I am so sorry. Please, I was stupid, I was weak. She manipulated me, she made me feel like I was never enough. Please do not let them send me to prison. Do not throw me out in the cold. I am your son. I am your only son. I will do anything. I will scrub the floors. I will work in the yard. Just please forgive me. Give me one more chance." I looked down at the top of his head. For a brief, fleeting second, I saw the ghost of a little boy running through the sawdust of my old workshop, holding a wooden hammer and smiling up at me with pure, innocent joy. I felt a heavy ache in my chest for the child he used to be. But that child was dead. The man clinging to my legs was a treacherous thief who had plotted to steal my home and my mind. I slowly reached down and firmly pried his trembling hands off my legs. I took a deliberate step backwards, severing the physical contact between us. Trey looked up at me, his tear-streaked face begging for the unconditional paternal mercy I had given him his entire life. But the well of my mercy was completely dry. Blood does not give you the right to trample on the man who gave you life. I said, my voice low, cold, and absolutely final. I worked my fingers to the bone so you could stand tall in this world, and you chose to get on your knees and crawl for a woman who despises everything about where you come from. You chose your path, Trey. Now you have to walk it alone. Trey let out a devastated, agonizing cry, curling into a ball on the floor. He finally understood that there was no safety net left. Sheriff Hayes checked his watch and signaled to his deputies. "Time is up," the sheriff announced loudly. "Clear the premises." 2 deputies stepped forward and hauled Trey up from the floor, dragging him toward the front doors. Another deputy marched up the stairs to retrieve the bags Chloe had packed, but as the deputy came back down the stairs holding 2 large suitcases, Chloe suddenly panicked. "Wait! My closet!" she yelled, pointing upstairs. "I have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of designer bags up there. I need my Hermes bags. I need my Chanel dresses. They are mine." Sheriff Hayes stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am, those items were purchased with stolen corporate funds. They are currently classified as evidence and subject to immediate asset forfeiture. You are leaving this house with nothing but the clothes on your back and the basic necessities in those 2 bags." "No," Chloe shrieked, launching herself toward the stairs. "I will not leave without my things. I deserve them." The deputies did not hesitate. They grabbed her firmly by the arms. She kicked and screamed, fighting like a feral cat, but they dragged her forcefully toward the open front doors. As they pulled her out onto the covered porch, a 3rd deputy arrived from the back hallway. He was carrying 3 large, bright orange Hermes boxes that Chloe had tried to hide near the rear exit. The deputy looked at me, awaiting instructions. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "Throw the trash out," I commanded. The deputy walked to the edge of the porch and hurled the heavy orange boxes out into the freezing storm. They landed with a heavy splash in the deep muddy puddles on the front lawn. The expensive cardboard immediately soaked through, tearing open and spilling thousands of dollars worth of imported silk scarves and luxury leather goods directly into the wet, filthy mud. Chloe screamed in pure agony as she watched her precious status symbols being destroyed by the rain and the dirt. She lunged forward, trying to reach the mud to save her bags, but the deputies held her back, pushing her relentlessly toward the dark street outside my gates. Her miserable screams faded into the stormy night, blending with the sound of the pouring rain and the distant ambulance sirens. I stood in the doorway of my beautiful silent mansion, watching the last remnants of their fake empire sink into the mud exactly where they belonged. The freezing rain continued to beat down relentlessly on the manicured lawns of my estate. I stood on the grand marble porch, watching my son and his wife shivering in the cold. Sheriff Hayes and his deputies had physically removed them from my property, leaving them on the muddy sidewalk at the edge of the street. Chloe was still sobbing, violently dropping to her knees in the dirt to frantically claw at the ruined silk scarves spilling out of the soaked orange boxes. Trey stood completely frozen, staring blankly at the wet pavement. They thought the worst part of their night was over. They thought being rendered homeless and penniless was the absolute bottom of the pit. They were entirely wrong. Before they could even attempt to walk down the street to find shelter, the distant wail of heavy sirens pierced the stormy night. The sound grew louder and more aggressive, echoing off the large mansions in the neighborhood. Suddenly, a convoy of heavily armored black utility vehicles came speeding around the corner. Their red and blue emergency lights sliced through the darkness, painting the falling rain in harsh neon colors. The vehicles screeched to a halt right in front of the muddy sidewalk, forming a blockade that completely boxed in my son and his wife. The doors of the lead vehicle swung open and several tall men in tactical windbreakers stepped out into the storm. Across their backs in bold yellow lettering was the unmistakable acronym of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. From the second vehicle, a familiar figure emerged holding a large black umbrella. It was my lead counsel, Nia. She wore her sharp navy blue suit, her posture radiating absolute lethal authority. She walked with the federal agents directly toward the trembling couple on the sidewalk. I remained on my covered porch, watching the final act of this tragic play unfold with perfect clarity. Nia stopped just a few feet away from Trey and Chloe. The federal agents fanned out, forming a tight perimeter around them. Chloe looked up from the mud, her ruined mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She stared at the federal agents with a new, profound level of terror. Trey Wright and Chloe Wright. Nia announced, her voice cutting through the heavy rain like a freshly sharpened blade. You are no longer just dealing with an eviction. I am accompanied by special agents of the federal government who have been reviewing the digital evidence I submitted to them earlier this evening. The lead federal agent stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of folded documents from his waterproof jacket. He looked at my son with absolute professional disgust. Trey Wright, the agent, declared loudly so there could be absolutely no misunderstanding. I have in my hand a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are hereby being placed under arrest for 3 counts of felony wire fraud across state lines. You systematically embezzled and illegally transferred $2 million from a corporate investment fund into hidden offshore accounts. Trey let out a choked, agonizing gasp. His knees buckled slightly, but a federal agent immediately grabbed his arm to keep him standing. The lead agent then turned his cold stare toward Chloe. She tried to scramble backward in the mud, but another agent stepped behind her, blocking her path. Chloe Wright. The agent continued, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. You are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit severe wire fraud. Furthermore, both of you are being charged with extreme elder abuse conspiracy and attempted medical document forgery. We have full audio and visual evidence of your transaction with a known criminal document forger to falsely declare your father-in-law mentally incompetent for financial gain. Chloe began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved violently as she shook her head back and forth in pure denial. You cannot do this, she screamed, her voice shrill and completely unhinged. I am a victim here. My husband lied to me. He told me it was his money. I did not do anything wrong. I am from a good family. You cannot put me in jail. I will not survive in jail. The federal agents did not care about her good family. They did not care about her delicate high society aesthetic. An agent stepped forward, grabbing her wrists and forcefully pulling them behind her back. The harsh metallic clicking sound of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the night. It was the sound of absolute finality, the sound of her entire fake empire crashing into the concrete. Trey did not fight. When the agent commanded him to put his hands behind his back, he simply obeyed, submitting to the cold steel cuffs without a single word of protest. His spirit was completely broken, but the ultimate humiliation was yet to come. Further down the street, parked bumper to bumper along the wealthy avenue, were the luxury cars belonging to the elite guests who had fled my mansion earlier. They had not left the neighborhood. Their drivers had been blocked by the sudden arrival of the federal convoy. The venture capitalists, the hedge fund managers, and the old money socialites Chloe had worshipped were all standing outside their vehicles holding massive golf umbrellas. They were not stepping forward to help her. They were not calling their expensive lawyers to bail her out. Instead, every single one of them was holding up their glowing smartphones. They were recording her. The bright flashes of camera lights pierced the dark street. The wealthy white elites of Atlanta were treating Chloe like a reality television spectacle. She was the arrogant girl who tried to climb into their exclusive circles, and now they were eagerly documenting her spectacular, catastrophic downfall. Chloe realized they were filming her. She looked wildly at the crowd of phones, her face twisting in pure agony. Arthur, she sobbed, calling out to the billionaire venture capitalist standing near his Bentley. Arthur, please help me. Call somebody. Tell them this is a mistake." Arthur Sterling did not lower his phone. He just shook his head, looking at her as if she were a piece of garbage floating in a gutter. She finally understood the harsh, brutal truth. These people never cared about her. They never considered her an equal. She was just entertainment to them, and tonight she was providing the best show in town. The agents grabbed Chloe by the arms and forcefully shoved her into the back of the armored federal transport vehicle. She kicked and screamed, but the heavy reinforced door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. Then the agents turned to Trey. They led him toward the second vehicle. As they reached the bumper, Trey stopped walking. He turned his head slowly, looking past the federal agents, past the flashing red and blue emergency lights, and looked directly up at me, standing on the elevated marble porch. The distance between us was only about 50 feet, but it felt like an endless, unbridgeable chasm. I looked into my son's eyes. I saw the profound, bottomless regret tearing his soul apart. I saw the little boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in the park, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect. His eyes were begging me for a final act of salvation. He was silently pleading for his father to step down from the porch, wrap an arm around him, and make all the bad things go away. For a fraction of a second, the iron wall around my heart cracked. A powerful, overwhelming wave of paternal grief crashed into my chest. I felt a hot, stinging sensation in my eye. A single solitary tear escaped and rolled slowly down my weathered cheek. It carried the weight of 40 years of fatherhood, of lost dreams, and of a family that could never be repaired. But then I remembered the audio recording. I remembered him casually agreeing to throw my life's work into a dumpster. I remembered him sitting idly by while his wife threw me into the freezing rain. I remembered him plotting to lock me inside a mental asylum to steal the very home I had built for his mother. I raised my calloused hand and quickly wiped the tear away from my face. I hardened my jaw and squared my shoulders. Compassion is a beautiful thing, I thought to myself, staring back at him with absolute cold resolve. But compassion is not for poisonous snakes. If you warm a snake by your fire, it will only live long enough to bite you again. I did not nod. I did not speak. I simply turned my back on him. I heard the heavy slam of the federal vehicle door closing behind me, sealing his fate. The engines roared to life and the sirens wailed once more as the convoy sped away into the stormy night, carrying the two most toxic people in my life away forever. The flashing lights faded down the street, leaving my estate in pure, peaceful silence. The toxic infection had finally been removed from my property. It was time to clean my house. The heavy red and blue emergency lights slowly faded into the distance, disappearing down the winding tree-lined streets of my neighborhood. The wail of the sirens was swallowed by the steady, rhythmic sound of the pouring rain. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, my property was completely silent. The massive crowd of elite guests had vanished. The federal agents were gone. The toxic infection that had plagued my family had been surgically removed. I stood on the marble porch for a long time, simply breathing in the cool, damp night air. My chest felt incredibly light. I turned around and walked back through the heavy oak double doors of the mansion. The grand foyer looked like the aftermath of a hurricane. Half-empty crystal champagne flutes were scattered across the side tables. Muddy footprints from the frantic exodus of the wealthy guests stained the imported hardwood floors that I had meticulously laid with my own hands decades ago. The air inside the house was thick with the lingering scent of Chloe's expensive, overpowering floral perfume. It smelled like fake sophistication and deeply rooted arrogance. I hated that smell. It was the scent of a woman who had tried to erase my history. I took off my tailored Tom Ford suit jacket and draped it over the wooden banister. I slowly rolled up the sleeves of my white silk shirt, exposing the thick scars and calluses on my forearms. The billionaire chairman of Wright Holdings retreated into the shadows, and the architect the builder took over. I did not want to wait until the morning to reclaim my space. I wanted the poison out of my house tonight. I picked up my secure phone and made a call to a private 24-hour estate remediation and moving crew that my company kept on a permanent retainer for rapid commercial cleanups. I told the dispatcher I needed a full team of 10 men at my address within the hour, and I needed them to bring the largest industrial disposal trucks they had available. When the crew arrived, I was waiting for them in the center of the living room. The foreman, a stout, hard-working man, walked in and asked what needed to be moved to storage. "Nothing goes to storage," I told him, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. I want you to go through every single room on the main floor and the entire top floor. Every piece of modern furniture, every sterile white rug, every piece of abstract art, every single item that the previous occupants brought into this house is to be thrown directly into the garbage trucks. I want this place stripped down to the bare walls and the original hardwood. Do not save a single throw pillow. The foreman nodded, recognizing the absolute finality in my tone. For the next 3 hours, the mansion was filled with the loud echoing sounds of heavy lifting. I watched with profound satisfaction as the cleaning crew hauled away the physical manifestations of Chloe's fake empire. They carried out the ridiculous velvet sofas she had bought to impress her country club friends. They dismantled the massive gaudy dining table where she had sat and mocked my working-class background. They threw her expensive, fragile, decorative vases into the heavy steel dumpsters parked in the driveway. With every piece of furniture that went out the front door, I felt the soul of the house slowly returning. The mansion was finally breathing again. The beautiful exposed brickwork I had crafted, the rich, warm tones of the mahogany walls, the natural flow of the rooms, all of it was suddenly visible once more. Chloe had tried to turn my home into a cold, sterile museum to validate her shallow existence. Now it was just a house again. My house. Once the crew had hauled the last of her pretentious belongings into the dumpsters, and the trucks rumbled away into the night, I was left completely alone in the massive empty space. The house was bare, but it felt incredibly warm. I walked down the hallway to the small ground floor suite where I had been staying. I knelt beside the bed and pulled out a heavy reinforced steel storage trunk. This was where I had hidden the things that truly mattered to me when Chloe had banished my belongings from the main living areas. I unlocked the heavy brass padlock and opened the lid. Inside, resting carefully wrapped in protective cloth, was a large silver picture frame. I picked it up, holding it gently in my rough hands. It was a photograph of my late wife, Vivian. It was taken 30 years ago, standing in the front yard of this very property, right after we had poured the foundation. She was wearing blue jeans and a white shirt, smiling so brightly that her joy seemed to leap right out of the glass. She had believed in me when I was just a broke laborer with big dreams. She had scrubbed the dirt from my hands and told me I was going to build an empire. I walked out of the small suite carrying the photograph like a precious relic. I walked through the empty grand foyer and into the main living room. I approached the massive stone fireplace that served as the center of the home. I reached up and carefully placed Vivian's silver frame right in the middle of the heavy wooden mantelpiece. I took a step back and looked at her beautiful face. "The house is clean, Viv," I whispered into the quiet room. "We are finally home." I walked over to the built-in mahogany bar that the cleaning crew had left untouched because I had built it myself. I poured a generous measure of aged bourbon into a heavy crystal glass. I sat down on the floor right in the center of the empty living room, crossing my legs and taking a slow, deep sip. The liquid burned pleasantly down my throat, warming my chest. I sat there in the silence, surrounded by the ghosts of my past and the stark reality of my present. I was 71 years old. I was a billionaire. I was the king of my castle. But I was also completely alone. My only son was sitting in a federal holding cell waiting to face a judge for crimes he had committed against his own flesh and blood. The dynasty I had worked my entire life to build, the wealth I had hoarded in the shadows, was supposed to be his inheritance. It was supposed to secure the right family name for generations. But Trey had proven that unearned wealth is a poison. I had given him too much too soon. I had shielded him from the struggle, and the struggle is exactly what builds character. I thought my money would make him a king, but it only made him a weak, cowardly thief who bowed down to racists just to feel important. I took another sip of bourbon, staring at the photograph of Vivian on the mantelpiece. She would have been broken-hearted to see what our son had become, but she would have understood exactly what I had to do next. You cannot plant a new garden in poisoned soil. You have to burn the dead crops and find new seeds. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and drafted an urgent, high-priority message to Nia, my lead counsel. I did not care that it was 3 in the morning. She was probably still awake, organizing the legal fallout of the arrests anyway. "Nia." I dictated into the phone, my voice perfectly steady and filled with a brand new, profound sense of purpose. "I want you to immediately dissolve the generational trust fund established in the name of Trey Wright. Liquidate all assets tied to his future inheritance. I am officially striking him from my will entirely." I paused, taking a deep breath before outlining the legacy that would replace him. "Take the entire sum of that trust fund," I continued, "and establish a new corporate entity. Name it the Vivian Wright Foundation. I want to create a massive, fully funded scholarship and mentorship program right here in Atlanta. We are going to target young orphaned black men and women, kids who are growing up in the same rough neighborhoods I came from, kids who have absolutely nothing but hunger in their bellies and fire in their eyes. I looked around the grand empty room, imagining it filled with the bright, ambitious faces of young people who actually deserved a chance. We are going to pay for their college tuitions, I told my lawyer. We are going to fund their trade schools. We are going to provide zero-interest loans for their first businesses. We are going to give them the tools, the education, and the financial foundation they need to build their own empires from the ground up. If my own blood could not understand the value of a hard day's work, then I will pass my legacy on to the children of this city who know exactly what it means to survive. I want the paperwork drafted and ready for my signature by Monday morning. I sent the message and placed the phone down on the floor next to me. A profound, overwhelming sense of peace washed over my entire body. For 3 years, I had carried the suffocating burden of my son's deceit. I had watched him twist into a monster under the influence of a toxic woman and my own misguided generosity. But that burden was gone now. The tumor had been excised. I raised my glass of bourbon toward the photograph of my beautiful wife, saluting the love we had shared and the difficult truth I had finally accepted. I was no longer building an inheritance for an ungrateful son. I was building a future for thousands of kids who would carry the right name with the honor and dignity it truly deserved. The architect had demolished the rotten structure, and the ground was finally clear to build something completely unbreakable. The rain outside finally stopped just as the first faint lines of dawn began to bleed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my mansion. The storm that had raged all night both outside my walls and inside my family was completely over. I walked into my private study, the one room the cleaning crew was instructed never to touch. I sat down in my heavy vintage leather armchair, the chair I had bought with my very first massive commercial paycheck over 40 years ago. It creaked familiarly under my weight, greeting me like an old loyal friend. I raised my crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip of my aged bourbon. The liquid was warm and rich, settling deep into my chest and melting away the lingering chill of the night. The silence in the house was absolute. It was a heavy, profound silence, but for the first time in 3 years it was not suffocating. It was entirely liberating. I sat back and looked around the vast empty space of my home. I was 71 years old, and I was completely, entirely alone. My only child was sitting in a cold concrete federal holding cell waiting to be processed for crimes that would likely put him away for the next decade. His wife, the woman who had tried to erase my existence, was locked in a cell right next to him, her fake empire of designer clothes and stolen prestige stripped away forever. The arrogant in-laws who had looked down on my skin color and my calloused hands were waking up to the reality of complete, total financial ruin. Many people might look at my situation and feel a deep, crushing sense of pity. They would see an old man sitting alone in a massive, empty mansion having just destroyed his own flesh and blood. They would think the loneliness must be unbearable, but they would be entirely wrong. There is a very distinct difference between being alone and being lonely. For the last 3 years, I had been surrounded by people. My son, my daughter-in-law, their wealthy, arrogant friends, their greedy parents. The house had been full of voices, footsteps, and laughter. But I had never felt more isolated in my entire life than when I was trapped in a home with people who looked at me not as a father or a human being, but as a walking, decaying bank account. I had lived with parasites who smiled to my face while sharpening the knives they planned to bury in my back. That kind of company drains your soul. It makes you question your own sanity. It makes you hide in the shadows of your own achievements just to keep the peace. The isolation of being surrounded by predators is a suffocating, terrifying prison. But this, the silence I was sitting in right now, this was the loneliness of absolute freedom. I took another sip of bourbon, letting the deep oak flavor ground me in the present moment. I did not feel a shred of guilt. A father is supposed to protect his son. He is supposed to guide him, teach him right from wrong, and provide a foundation for him to build a respectable life. I had done all of that. I gave Trey the world on a silver platter. I gave him the education, the safety, and the financial backing that I had to bleed for when I was his age, working the concrete lines in the blistering Georgia heat. But a father is also a man, and a man must demand respect. When the son you raised decides to spit on your legacy, when he stands by and watches you get thrown into the freezing rain, when he plots with criminals to lock you in a mental asylum just to steal the deed to your house, the contract of fatherhood is officially null and void. At that point, he is no longer a son making a mistake. He is a grown adult making a calculated, malicious choice to destroy you. I refuse to be a victim in my own story. I refuse to let my hard-earned empire be inherited by a coward and a racist, entitled woman who thought my life's work was her personal shopping fund. I let them play their cruel little games. I let them think they had backed the helpless old man into a corner. I let them feel the intoxicating thrill of their fake victory. And then I showed them what happens when you wake the sleeping giant. I leaned my head back against the cool leather of my armchair, closing my eyes. A wave of profound, absolute satisfaction washed over my entire body. It started in my chest and radiated out to my fingertips. It was the feeling of a king reclaiming his throne after casting out the traitors. My dignity, which Chloe had tried to strip away piece by piece, had been completely, fully restored. I was no longer the dirty old man banished to the garage. I was Desmond Wright, the architect, the titan, the master of my own universe. The sun finally crested over the Atlanta skyline, pouring bright golden light through the massive windows and illuminating the polished hardwood floors of my grand foyer. The light caught the silver picture frame resting on the mantelpiece across the hall. Vivian's beautiful smiling face seemed to glow in the morning sun. I smiled back at her. Our legacy was safe. The millions of dollars I had pulled back from Trey's frozen accounts were already being processed by my legal team. The Vivian Wright Foundation was no longer just an idea, it was a reality. In a few months, this massive empty house would not be filled with arrogant country club elites sipping stolen champagne. It would be filled with young, ambitious, black men and women from the hardest neighborhoods in Atlanta. Kids who knew the value of a dollar. Kids who understood loyalty. Kids who just needed one solid piece of foundation to build their own towering empires. They would be my true legacy. They would carry the right name with honor. I stood up from my leather chair, leaving the empty crystal glass on my desk. I walked to the grand front doors and pushed them wide open, stepping out onto the marble porch. The morning air was crisp, clean, and entirely pure. The storm had washed away the dirt, the mud, and the toxic residue of the people who had tried to bury me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet taste of absolute victory and unshakable peace. Blood may make you related, but loyalty, respect, and character make you family. When you build an empire from the dirt, never let entitlement convince those around you that your kindness is a weakness. Age does not diminish a man's strength, it simply sharpens his vision. True wealth is not the house you live in or the car you drive. It is the boundaries you enforce and the peace you protect. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is burning down the bridges that others use to trample you and watching the flames illuminate your new path. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace? Tell me your experiences. Please hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and truth. Until next time, stay strong and always protect your peace.